In my first life, I did not die fighting a monster, saving a kingdom, or uncovering some forbidden secret. I died because a 300-kilogram fake ram fell on me while I was trying to save a real goat. The goat had escaped from a petting pen at a city fair. I had spent 4 years working at an animal shelter, so I knew the exact look animals wore before making terrible decisions. The little gray criminal lowered its head and stared at 6 lanes of traffic. It clearly decided that becoming part of a bus grill sounded exciting. I grabbed it by the harness and dragged it back. Above us, a cable snapped. A giant advertising ram swung off the front of a sporting goods store, and my final thought was that the sculptor had made the horns unnecessarily realistic. Then, I woke with my face in goat manure. My ribs felt as if the fake ram had followed me into the next world. Blood coated my tongue. Someone had twisted my arms behind my back, and a boot pressed between my shoulder blades, while a crowd watched from the shade of mud brick houses. A broad man, in a green caftan, stood over me. Silver threaded his trimmed black beard. Bronze rings covered 3 fingers, and his expression held the calm annoyance of a merchant discovering mold on grain. He announced that 30 sheep had vanished from his northern pasture. The young shepherd responsible for them had supposedly sold the animals and hidden the money. Apparently, that young shepherd was me. I tried to rise with dignity. My new body shook so badly that Dignity filed a complaint and left. I planted 1 foot, pushed up, and stepped directly into the same pile of manure with the other sandal. The laughter hurt almost as much as my ribs. Memories arrived in broken flashes. The green-coated man was Hardon, the richest herd owner in Dustwell. The body belonged to Tair, a 19-year-old hired shepherd who had spent most of his life apologizing before anyone finished accusing him. Tair had long, dark copper hair, bleached pale at the ends, golden brown eyes, and a white scar through his right eyebrow. He also weighed barely more than a sack of wool and wore an oversized brown tunic tied with rope. The missing sheep had disappeared during Rag Hardon's night watch, not Tair's. Rag was Hardon's son, a narrow-faced man with a pale blonde braid, a blue sash, and a silver cap on one front tooth. The old Tair had known that. He had also known better than to accuse a rich man's heir. A gray-eyed youth named Mirek stood beside the storage wall. His ash-brown curls were crushed under a yellow scarf, and his broken nose made his face easy to remember. He had worked the pasture with Tair. When Hardon demanded a witness, Mirek lowered his gaze and confirmed that Tair had left the flock before dawn. The lie cost him visible effort. His jaw kept tightening. His right heel scraped the dirt in short, nervous strokes. Tair's old memories supplied the reason. Mirek supported a 12-year-old sister. Hardon had threatened to throw both of them out if he refused. Understanding did not make the boot on Tair's back lighter. Hardon declared the lost sheep a debt. Tair's hut would be seized, his future wages claimed, and he would leave Dustwell before sunset. Since a thief could not be trusted near honest animals, Hardon generously allowed him 3 dying goats and an old dog nobody wanted. The crowd laughed again, because generosity was much funnier when it came with a death sentence. Tair looked toward Mirek. The young man could not meet his eyes. Something inside him wanted to stay down. It was not his own instinct. It belonged to the body, built from years of swallowed anger and learned retreat. His heart raced merely because Hardon was looking at him. His hands had already begun to open in surrender. Then, a memory cut through the fear. Blind Borun sitting beside a cold stove. Borun splitting his own bread and pretending he had already eaten. Borun telling the old Tair that being gentle was not the same as being weak, even if cruel men found it convenient to confuse the two. Tair stopped trying to bargain for himself. He asked what Hardon had done with his grandfather. Hardon's eyes shifted toward the eastern lane. That was enough. Tair twisted before the man holding him expected resistance. The movement sent a blade of pain through his ribs, but the boot slid away. He scrambled up, nearly fell, and ran through Dustwell while Hardon's men shouted behind him. He did not run fast. His breath tore after 20 steps. His vision narrowed after 40. And by the time he reached the hut, his legs felt filled with hot sand. 2 laborers were dragging Borun outside on his sleeping mat. The old man was lean beneath a faded striped cloak. A white beard hung in one narrow braid to his chest. His clouded blue-gray eyes stared past everything, and his right hand gripped a bone-handled staff. Their single wool blanket had been thrown into the dust beside him. One laborer carried out the clay cooking pot. The other was trying to pry loose the door hinges. Tair crossed the yard and caught the pot before it fell. The effort almost folded him. It was not even full. Borun turned his head toward the sound of Tair's breathing. He immediately asked who had beaten him and how many ribs were damaged. He did not ask whether Tair had stolen the sheep. That question never came. Tair told him the truth in a few urgent sentences. Borun listened without interrupting, thumb rubbing the smooth head of his staff. When Tair mentioned Mirek's testimony, the old man's mouth tightened. When he mentioned exile, Borun tilted his face toward the wind, as if measuring the remaining daylight. He said they would need to leave within the hour. Hardin had selected sunset because the western road became dangerous after dark. The laborers looked uncomfortable. One muttered that the order came from Hardin and tried to take the pot. Tair held on. His hands trembled, but he did not release it. For several breaths, nobody moved. Then a low growl came from beneath the cart. An old brown dog dragged himself into the light. His muzzle was gray, one ear was torn, and his left hind leg barely touched the ground. His ribs showed through a dull coat. Tair recognized him from the body's memories as Brown, Borun's former herd dog. Hardon's overseers had kicked him away from the pasture months earlier, after he became too slow. Brown placed himself between Tair and the laborers anyway. The growl had almost no strength behind it. It still worked. The men abandoned the pot and settled for carrying off the hinges. A strange blur appeared at the edge of Tair's sight. At first he blamed the beating. Then, pale lines formed over Brown's body, clear as writing on clean glass. Brown. Health, 18 of 100. Trust, 96 of 100. Strongest quality. Loyalty. Possible evolution. Steppe guardian. Condition. Voluntarily defend his master after receiving the master's final food. Tair stared until the words faded. He looked at the 3 goats tied beside the broken fence. The smallest was a white female with trembling knees and a brown patch around one eye. New words appeared. Squirrel. Health 11. Trust 38. Strongest quality? Endurance. Possible evolution? Silver-horned nurturer. The second goat, a bony red-brown female, was chewing through her own rope with the concentration of a professional criminal. Her name was Thorn. Health 27. Trust 22. Strongest quality? Balance. Possible evolution? Stone-horned guardian. The last goat was an older gray doe named Ash. Her health was 34. Her strongest quality was calmness, and no evolution path appeared. Tair felt a brief, irrational disappointment before catching himself. An animal did not become worthless because a glowing window had no reward attached. That thought made Ash's trust rise by 1 point. So the system could sense more than feeding. Wonderful. He had been reincarnated into poverty, with an interface that judged his relationship skills. Hardon's men returned with 2 more workers and a handcart. Tair had no time to test anything. He packed the blanket, pot, a cracked wooden bowl, flint, 3 lengths of rope, a blunt skinning knife, and the last strip of dried mutton in the hut. Borun wore his striped cloak. Tair kept his oversized tunic. He tied his copper hair back with a faded blue cord the old man had once used on a shepherd's bell. Hardon came to watch them leave. He offered one final performance for the villagers, warning that thieves always blamed honest men. Rag stood at his shoulder, polished boots clean despite the dusty lane. His blue sash looked expensive enough to feed Borun for a month. When Tair glanced at him, Rag's silver tooth flashed in a quick smile. The old body's fear returned so sharply that Tair's fingers numbed. He wanted to accuse Rag. He had no proof. Shouting would only entertain Hardon and give the guards a reason to hit him again. So Tair memorized the pale braid, the blue sash, and the smile. There would be another day for that problem, assuming he survived this one. Borun tapped his staff against the road and asked whether Hardan had chosen Dry Hollow for them. Hardan confirmed it with false sympathy. The land lay beyond the abandoned charcoal pits, too far from Dustwell's guarded well, and too poor for grazing. Borun observed that Hardan had always possessed a talent for selecting gifts no sane man wanted. Several villagers hid smiles. Hardan did not. Tair took the handcart handles. The first pull reopened pain across his ribs. Brown limped beside Borun, while the goats followed on one rope. Thorn managed to bite Rag's blue sash as they passed. The cloth tore with a sound that carried across the square. Tair did not laugh. He was too busy pretending not to see it. They left Dustwell beneath an orange sky. Children watched from rooftops. Adults avoided their eyes. Mirik stood at the far end of the lane, with his little sister beside him. Lysa had black braids, one missing front tooth, and both hands wrapped around a small bundle. Mirak did not approach. Lysa did. She ran to the cart, dropped 2 fist-sized barley cakes under the blanket, and hurried back before Hardan's overseer noticed. Borun heard the light footsteps and the rustle. He said nothing until the settlement disappeared behind a ridge. Then he asked Tair how much food the girl had risked giving them. Tair checked the bundle. 2 barley cakes, hard enough to hammer nails, but still edible. Borun decided that Mirik's family had not entirely lost its courage. It was not forgiveness. It was merely an accurate account. Dry Hollow lay 3 hours west for a healthy traveler. It took them 5. The path crossed a pale grassland cut by dry channels, low stone shelves, and thorn scrub. Tair's new body tired so quickly that he had to stop every few hundred steps. Each pause consumed daylight. Each delay made Borun lift his face toward the cooling wind. The old man explained that wolves hunted the hollow after sunset. He knew the place from his younger years, before the spring failed. There had once been a shepherd shelter at the north wall, and a shallow cistern near a split boulder. If either remained usable, they might live through the night. Might was doing heroic work in that sentence. Tair divided 1 barley cake into 6 pieces. Borun received 2. Each goat received half of 1, and Brown received the crumbs softened with a mouthful of water. Tair ate the remaining piece and told Borun he had taken more earlier. Borun reached out, found Tair's wrist, and felt his pulse. He calmly informed him that lying while starving made the heartbeat jump in a particular way. Then he broke one of his own pieces and pushed half into Tair's hand. The old man was blind, exhausted, and being hauled toward a wolf den. He was still difficult to fool. They reached Dry Hollow after sunset. The shelter was worse than Borun remembered. 3 mud brick walls still stood beneath a sagging reed roof. The 4th had collapsed inward, leaving a gap wide enough for a horse. The cistern held dust, dead beetles, and a cracked clay cup. No spring fed it anymore. The hollow itself formed a shallow bowl between 2 ridges. Wind carried every scent toward the shelter. That would help wolves find them. The broken wall would help wolves enter. The remaining roof might help wolves stay dry while eating them. Tair unloaded Borun and the animals. He used the handcart as part of a barrier, stacked fallen bricks beneath it, and wedged thorn branches into the openings. The work took nearly an hour because his hands lacked strength. He could not lift one of the larger stones. After 3 attempts, his arms failed, and the stone rolled against his shin. Borun listened to the scrape and told him to stop wasting energy on a rock that outweighed his pride. He guided Tair to smaller pieces and explained how to build 2 angled rows that locked against one another. Blindness had taken his sight, not his experience. They tied the goats behind the rear wall. Ash stood quietly. Squirrel shivered despite the warmth. Thorn immediately began testing every knot. Brown refused to lie down. He paced the gap, dragging his bad leg. Tair inspected him by touch. The paw pads were cracked. An old bite scar had tightened around the hip. The dog was severely dehydrated, yet the trust value remained at 96. Old Tair had loved him, and Brown had not forgotten. The interface showed the evolution condition again. Final food. Tair took out the dried mutton. It was one narrow strip, smoky and hard, perhaps enough to keep Boren alert through the night. The system specifically demanded the master's final food, though. Not a symbolic crumb. He hated that wording. It turned care into a test. Brown smelled the meat and looked away. That settled it. Tair knelt, tore the strip into smaller pieces, and fed every one to the dog. Brown swallowed, only after Tair pressed the first piece against his tongue. When the food was gone, Tair let the old dog drink 3 mouthfuls from their water skin. Boren heard the swallowing and asked whether Tair had just given away the meat. Tair admitted it. The old man considered the choice, then said Brown had guarded their family for 14 years and deserved one final good meal. His voice stayed steady, but his fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket. The word final sat badly between them. Darkness settled over the hollow. Tair lit no fire because they had little fuel, and flames would announce their location from miles away. He sharpened the end of a broken roof pole with the blunt knife. Boren showed him how to brace it against the ground and keep the point low. A charging wolf, he explained, would dodge a high thrust, but often commit its weight before seeing a low one. Tair practiced twice. The third attempt made him dizzy. Boren corrected the position of his rear foot by tapping his ankle with the staff. He told Tair that a spear began in the ground, traveled through the legs, and only happened to come out through the hands. Tair's arms were weak. His legs were worse. This was not encouraging information, but it was useful. The goats grew restless before Tair heard anything. A faint scrape touched the far ridge. Another answered from the south. Tair saw nothing beyond the shelter, yet the animals tracked movement across the darkness. The air smelled of dust, old grass, and something musky. Brown's trust remained 96. The first wolf appeared as 2 pale eyes beyond the handcart. It was thin, but not starving. 3 more shapes moved behind it. Another pair circled toward the collapsed side. Tair's mouth dried. In his old life, he had handled frightened dogs, aggressive goats, and 1 furious raccoon trapped in a laundry room. None of those experiences included being eaten. The lead wolf approached the thorn barrier. Brown growled and stepped forward. His hind leg folded. He caught himself before falling. The wolves noticed. The first one lunged at the handcart, testing the gap. Bricks shifted. Tair shoved them back with the roof pole. A second wolf snapped through the thorns and tore his sleeve. The reaction from the old body's memories was immediate. Freeze. Lower the eyes. Make yourself smaller. Tair obeyed for half a second. The wolf struck again. Brown threw himself across the opening. Teeth closed on his torn ear and dragged him against the cart. The old dog did not release his own bite. He twisted, forcing the younger wolf sideways, and another animal rushed toward Boren through the widened gap. Tair moved because there was no room left for fear. He planted the pole as Boren had taught him. The wolf came low. The point entered beneath its shoulder, but Tair's weak grip failed. The shaft ripped from his hands. The animal crashed into him, claws cutting his chest, and both rolled across the dirt. Its breath struck his face. Its jaws opened above his throat. Brown released the first wolf and slammed his body into the second. The effort tore something in his bad leg. He collapsed between the predator and Boren. The pale system lines blazed across Tair's sight. Brown's trust reached 100. The evolution condition was complete. Light did not fall from the sky. No thunder announced a miracle. Brown simply inhaled, and the entire shelter seemed to inhale with him. His thin chest expanded. Bones shifted beneath his coat with a deep series of cracks. The gray-brown fur darkened along the spine, thickening into a heavy ridge. Torn muscle rebuilt itself around the wounded hip. His paws spread against the earth, until each was broader than Tair's hand. The wolf, biting his shoulder, tried to pull away, but Brown rose with the animal still attached. The old dog became large enough to look the handcart over. Steppe Guardian evolution complete. Health restored to 74. Strongest quality strengthened. Bond reward transferred. Tair understood the wording only after the reward entered him. Loyalty had triggered Brown's evolution, but the bond transferred the strongest physical advantages of the evolved form. The system would not give Tair loyalty as a statistic. It gave him the senses and reaction Brown now used to express it. Tair's world exploded into sound and scent. He heard Borun's heartbeat. He heard claws scratching beyond the wall, and the dry click of thorn chewing rope. He smelled blood from the wolf on the floor, fear from the goats, and each predator outside as a separate trail in the wind. His muscles did not become powerful, but the delay between seeing danger and responding nearly vanished. The wolf above him snapped again. Tair turned his head before the jaws closed. His hand found the fallen pole. He rolled, drove one knee beneath the shaft, and used his whole body to force the sharpened end deeper into the animal's chest. The wolf shuddered and went still. Tair had killed an animal for the first time in Ivor life. There was no triumph in it. His hands shook around the wood. Then a second wolf leaped over the cart, and reflection could wait. Brown met it in midair. The Steppe Guardian's jaws closed behind the wolf's neck. One hard shake ended the attack. Another predator tried the side gap, only to retreat when Brown turned. The old pack had surrounded weak prey. It now faced something larger than any normal dog, standing over two dead wolves with blood on his silvered muzzle. The lead wolf hesitated. Tair smelled that hesitation like bitter smoke. He pulled the pole free, stepped beside Brown, and shouted without words that mattered. He drove the point against the handcart, making the frame crack. Brown advanced one pace. The goats stamped behind him. Even Ash lowered her horns. The pack withdrew in stages. First, the animals nearest the shelter backed into darkness. Then the eyes on the ridge vanished. The lead wolf remained for several breaths, measuring Brown, before turning west. Silence returned unevenly. Tair listened until the last footfall faded beyond the hollow. Only then did his knees give way. Brown immediately became a dog again, in every way except size. He pushed his massive head into Tair's chest and licked blood, dust, and dignity from his face. His tail struck the handcart hard enough to dislodge 3 bricks. Borun reached toward the noise. His fingers found one enormous ear, then traveled along a skull wider than his lap. He calmly asked why their dying dog had become a calf during the night. Tair began laughing. It hurt his ribs. He could not stop. The interface appeared again when the laughter ended. Tair, strength 6, endurance 7, speed 10, perception 20, riding 7, spear 2. The numbers proved he had changed. The dead wolf at his feet proved it more clearly. Then Brown sniffed the water skin and whined. Tair checked it. Less than 1 cup remained. Borun's lips were cracked, his pulse too fast, and heat had begun to gather beneath his skin. The system did not offer medicine or mercy. It only displayed a simple warning. Borun would not survive another day without water. Tair looked toward the black mouth of Dry Hollow. The wolves were gone, but somewhere beyond them lay empty gullies, old beast trails, and perhaps the ruins of a spring. He had until sunrise to find it. Tair could have left Borun in the shelter and searched faster alone. He rejected the idea before it fully formed. The wolves had retreated from Brown, not disappeared from the steppe, and the dead animals would draw scavengers by morning. He loaded the old man onto the handcart, tied the dead wolves beneath the rear frame, and secured the goats to a side rail. Their hides and meat might keep the family alive if he found water. If he did not, carrying them would become an impressive amount of effort devoted to dying with luggage. Brown walked ahead. His transformed body moved with an ease that made the previous dog seem like a bad memory. He stood nearly to Tair's chest, at the shoulder, with dark brown fur, a silver muzzle, and a thick ridge along his neck. The injured hind leg had healed, yet he favored it for the first few minutes, out of habit. Boru noticed the uneven rhythm and ordered the animal to stop pretending he was old. Brown's ears flattened in obvious guilt. The old man then guided Tair by memory. Dry Hollow had once collected rain from 3 ravines. The northern channel ended in deep stone and had probably dried first. The western channel ran through loose sand. The eastern branch cut near black rock, where water sometimes survived beneath the surface, even when the springs failed. Tair followed the eastern channel. His new senses changed darkness from a wall into a collection of clues. He heard beetles under bark and lizards slipping through grass. Brown's scent trail remained clear, even 30 steps ahead. When wind crossed the ravine, it carried layers of mineral dust, goat musk, wolf blood, and a faint sweetness from distant flowering weeds. Water had no strong scent, but damp soil did. He found none. The handcart wheels caught on every stone. Tair's palms opened along old blisters, and his bruised ribs stabbed whenever he leaned forward. The strength value of 6 sounded less impressive after half an hour of hauling a blind man, 3 goats, and 2 wolves uphill.
Squirrel stumbled repeatedly.
Tair stopped to check her gums and skin. Severe dehydration had turned her mouth tacky. Her belly was too empty, but feeding dry grain without water could make the problem worse. He let her lick moisture from the inside of the waterskin, giving her only a few drops. The goat leaned her narrow face against his wrist. Her trust rose to 44. The system could apparently count basic competence as affection. Tair decided not to complain. The eastern ravine narrowed until the handcart barely fit between stone walls. Dawn had not yet colored the sky, but the stars were fading. Boren's breathing grew rougher. The old man insisted that he was merely irritated by the ride. His pulse said otherwise. Brown stopped at a fork and sniffed both passages. The left smelled of old bones and boar. The right held nothing except dust. Boren asked what the dog had found. Tair described the scent. The old man warned that steppe boars sometimes claimed seasonal springs. An ordinary boar could gut a man. The larger ones grew shoulder plates thick enough to turn arrows. He suggested the right passage. Tair looked at Boren's cracked lips. Then he looked left. The right passage was safer because it likely contained nothing. Safety had become a luxury item. They took the left. The ravine climbed around 2 bends before Squirrel jerked against her rope. Thorn bit her flank in irritation. Ash braced, and the weakened white goat slipped sideways over the edge of a narrow crack. Squirrel struck the stone wall and hung below the path, legs kicking over darkness. Tair dropped the cart handles and grabbed the rope. His injured palms burned. Thorn and Ash were tied to the same line, so their weight stopped Squirrel's fall. But Thorn immediately began backing away from the edge. One more step would drag the smaller goat against the rock, hard enough to break her neck. Tair wrapped the rope around his forearm and ordered Brown to block Thorn. The huge dog placed one paw in front of the stubborn goat. Thorn lowered her head. Brown lowered his. After a silent debate between 2 creatures with very different opinions about size, Thorn stopped moving. Boren slid from the cart and anchored the rope around his staff. He could not see the edge, yet his hands found the strain and angle by touch. He directed Tair to a stone knob on the left wall and told him to loop the rope there before climbing down. It was their only good rope. Sharp stone was already cutting the fibers. Tair could save it by hauling from above. Squirrel's front leg hung at an unnatural angle, and every pull scraped her across the wall. The goat made one thin sound. He tied the rope around his waist and descended. The crack was wider below the opening. His sandals slid on polished stone. He reached Squirrel, lifted her against his chest, and discovered that the darkness continued beneath them. Cool air touched his face from below. Not cold. Cool. Squirrel stopped struggling. Her tongue flicked against the rock beside Tair's shoulder. The stone was damp. Tair scraped it with his fingernail. A dark line appeared beneath the dust. He leaned close and smelled wet mineral, weak but undeniable. He called up to Boran that the goat had found moisture. The old man did not celebrate. He told Tair to save the goat before naming her a great explorer. With Borun and Brown pulling, Tair climbed. The rope frayed nearly halfway through at one point. He pressed Squirrel against the wall, shifted his foot to a lower ledge, and took the weight on his legs. The balance reward from Brown had not changed, because Brown had not given one. Tair was still a hungry young man, standing on 3 inches of stone while holding a goat. He made it anyway. Squirrel's leg was bruised, not broken. Tair splinted it with 2 straight pieces of brush, and strips torn from his oversized sleeve. Then he returned to the crack with the clay cup, widened a narrow shelf, and climbed farther down. At the bottom, beneath loose stones, water seeped through a seam in the black rock. It collected 1 drop at a time, in a hollow no larger than a cooking bowl. Tair stared at it, as if he had discovered a palace. The first cup went to Boran. The old man tried to refuse, until Tair reminded him that a corpse could not teach anyone where the next pasture lay. Borun drank slowly, rinsing his mouth before swallowing. Brown received the second cup. The goats shared the third. Tair waited for the fourth. It took almost 20 minutes to fill. By sunrise, they had gathered enough to wet everyone's mouth, but not enough to live on. Tair studied the seam. Water pressure existed behind the stones. The old spring had not vanished. It had been buried. The blunt knife bent within an hour. He used the broken clay cup as a scoop, and a flat wolf bone as a lever. Boran sorted stones by touch and built a small retaining lip. Brown dragged larger rocks away in his jaws. Even Ash helped by nosing loose gravel aside, while Thorn treated the excavation as an invitation to climb onto Tair's back. Squirrel lay in the shade with her splinted leg. Whenever Tair looked over, the interface showed her health creeping upward and her trust rising with it. By midday, the seep filled the hollow twice as fast. Near evening, Brown pulled free a flat stone wedged behind the seam, and the buried pressure finally opened a narrow channel. The trickle became a steady stream that filled about 5 large buckets each hour. Tair and Boran deepened the basin into a storage cistern, holding several dozen buckets. The water remained muddy at first, so Tair filtered it through cloth and boiled it over a fire of dried thorn branches. Food became the next problem. The dead wolves provided meat, but cutting them apart with a blunt knife consumed hours. In his first life, Tair had handled dead animals at the shelter, but he had never skinned one. This body knew more. Old Tair's hands remembered where to cut around the joints, while Boran corrected the uncertain cuts by touch and description. They roasted strips for themselves and boiled the tougher pieces for Brown. The goats browsed on salt grass growing in shaded pockets near the black rock. It was sparse, yet greener than anything in the hollow. Squirrel could not stand long enough to graze. Tair collected the youngest shoots, chewed the hardest stems to soften them, and fed her by hand. He used a little boiled water to clean the scrapes along her side, then gave her the last half of the second barley cake. Her trust reached 61. The evolution condition remained incomplete. That night, Boran slept beside the spring. His fever eased after water and broth, though weakness left him trembling. Tair stayed awake, listening to the ravine. Brown rested across the entrance, so large that nothing could pass without touching him. Near midnight, a heavy scraping sound came from above. Brown rose without growling. A smell rolled down the stone passage. Mud, musk, old blood, and male boar. Tair smelled the animal before hearing its steps. Each hoof struck stone with enough weight to vibrate through the basin. The boar rounded the bend and filled the ravine. It was taller than Tair's waist and nearly twice his length. Black bristles formed a ridge from skull to shoulders. Mud and resin had hardened across its front like armor, and one yellow tusk curved almost to its eye. This was not a hungry animal wandering into camp. This was the owner returning to its spring. Brown moved forward. The boar charged. The steppe guardian caught it from the side, jaws closing behind the ear, but the boar's weight carried both of them into the wall. Stone cracked. Brown released before the tusk could hook his belly. The boar spun faster than something that size had any right to move. Tair grabbed the sharpened roof pole. His first plan was simple. Keep the boar away from Barun. Let Brown attack its rear, and drive the point into the softer neck. The plan lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Brown rushed again. The boar backed against the narrowest wall, protecting its flanks, then lowered its plated head. It had survived wolves before. When Brown feinted left, the boar ignored him and charged straight at the spring. Tair realized too late that the animal was not trying to kill the dog. It was trying to reclaim the water and crush whatever stood there. Squirrel lay directly in its path. Tair planted the pole. The boar hit it low. The sharpened end skidded across hardened mud without penetrating. The impact drove the shaft into Tair's ribs and threw him backward. His shoulder struck the retaining wall. Water spilled across the dirt. The boar came on. Tair could roll away. The gap to his right was open. Squirrel tried to rise behind him and collapsed on her splinted leg. He stayed. He shoved the pole sideways between the boar's tusks. The animal lifted its head, taking Tair off the ground. He kicked against the wall, twisted the shaft, and forced the snout away from the goat by less than a handspan. Pain flashed through both shoulders. His grip began to fail. Brown struck from behind, biting deep into the boar's rear leg. The boar kicked, catching the dog beneath the jaw. Brown crashed against the basin. The great animal turned toward him, giving Tair one breath. He dragged Squirrel under the handcart. The goat's trust jumped to 87. The system revealed the full condition. Receive careful treatment while helpless. Share the master and limited food. Choose to stand between the master and the stronger beast. 2 conditions were complete. The final one depended on a goat with a splinted leg deciding to fight a monster. Tair considered that unfair to everyone involved. The boar rushed Brown again. Brown sidestepped, but the ravine offered little space. One tusk sliced through the thick fur along his chest. Tair heard skin tear and smelled fresh blood. He needed a surface the spear could penetrate. The boar's eyes were small and protected. Its throat stayed low. The belly was softer, but reaching it meant standing beneath hundreds of kilograms of furious muscle. Borin had pulled himself against the rock wall. He called out the position of the old spring channel based on the sound of spilling water. Beneath the boar's front feet lay the loosened stones Tair had excavated that morning. The ground was no longer solid. Tair changed tactics. He struck the wall with the pole, drawing the boar's attention, then retreated across the wet excavation. The animal followed. Brown understood before Tair gave any command. The dog circled left and drove the boar toward the basin with short attacks at its heels. The boar charged. Tair waited until he smelled the hot breath and heard the front hoof break through the stone crust. Then he jumped sideways. His new reaction saved him. His weak legs almost ruined it. The boar's front half plunged into the loosened channel. One knee struck rock. Its head dropped, and the mud armor split along the neck where stones scraped it away. Brown seized the exposed shoulder and pulled. Tair drove the pole into the crack. The point entered flesh, but stopped against bone. The boar screamed, surged upward, and snapped the shaft. Half remained in the wound. Its rear hoof caught Tair's thigh and sent him spinning across the ravine. The original plan had failed. The trap had worked only halfway. Brown bled from the chest, and Tair no longer had a proper spear. The boar tore itself free. It turned toward Tair. A small shape crawled from beneath the handcart. Squirrel could barely place weight on one foreleg. She shook from nose to tail. She was also directly between Tair and the boar. The white goat lowered her tiny horns. Her trust reached 100. The boar charged, likely offended by the concept. Silver light ran along Squirrel's horns. Her thin body filled out in a smooth wave from shoulders to hips. The brown patch around her eye sharpened against a clean white coat. Her legs straightened. A pair of pale silver horns curled back from her skull. Not large enough for battle, but bright as polished metal. The trembling stopped. Squirrel evolved into a silver-horned nurturer. She did not become a war beast. She remained a goat. She simply refused to move. The boar's attention fixed on her for one fatal moment. Brown hit its wounded side. The broken pole shifted deeper. The animal stumbled against the rock shelf, exposing the softer hollow behind its jaw. Tair snatched the bent knife from the ground, stepped onto the boar's planted foreleg, and climbed its shoulder. His injured thigh nearly folded. He caught the bristles with one hand and drove the knife behind the jaw with the other. The blade went into the hilt. The boar threw him off, staggered 3 steps, and collapsed beside the spring. For several seconds, the ravine contained only harsh breathing and dripping water. Tair rolled onto his back. Squirrel walked over and began licking his ear. The bond reward struck him like warmth spreading through cold limbs. His stomach stopped cramping from hunger. The burning in his lungs eased. His heartbeat slowed. He could feel his body drawing more from every breath and every scrap of food. Endurance increased. Recovery from hunger strengthened. Digestion strengthened. The system showed his new values. Strength 9, endurance 18, speed 12, perception 22, riding 7, spear 5, leadership 3. Borun crawled over, found Tair's face with both hands, and checked for broken bones. Once satisfied that his grandson was alive, he reached for Squirrel. His fingers traced the silver horns. He observed that the smallest goat in the family had developed expensive decorations, while they still owned one pot. The morning after the fight, Squirrel gave milk. It was thicker than ordinary goat milk and carried a mild sweetness, despite her poor feed. Even on weak forage, Squirrel produced close to 4 quarts across 2 milkings, enough to explain the cheese Tair could make without starving the household. The system described it as highly nourishing, resistant to spoilage, and useful for recovery. It did not appear from nothing. She needed almost twice the normal amount of good forage and water, and small medicinal portions mattered more than filling entire cups. Tair gave the first warm cup to Borun. Color returned to the old man's face before he finished it. Brown received the second cup, mixed with broth. Tair took the third. For several wonderful breaths, his bruises stopped aching and strength returned to his hands. Then, the enriched milk met a stomach that had not yet fully adapted to the bond reward. Tair made it behind the shelter with seconds to spare. Borun listened to his hurried retreat and announced that miracles should apparently be consumed in smaller portions. By the end of the next day, they had meat from the giant boar, 2 wolf hides, a working spring, and 1 evolved goat whose milk could keep them alive. They also had a problem that grew larger each time Tair looked at Squirrel. The salt grass around the spring would not feed her for more than a week. Brown now consumed as much meat as 4 large dogs. The spring remained exposed. The shelter stood half a mile away, and the scent of blood would draw more predators. Every gain demanded food. Walls, labor, or all 3. The black rock offered one minor mercy. White mineral crust collected in dry pockets above the old spring. Borun identified it as bitter but usable salt. Tair scraped the crust, dissolved it in boiled water, filtered out grit, and dried it again. The result was too harsh for good trade cheese, but enough to preserve meat and season their first batches. Tair returned to the shelter, carrying Borun on the cart and the boar meat in bundles. His endurance let him walk without stopping every few hundred steps. The load still hurt, but his body recovered while moving instead of collapsing under the effort. Near Dry Hollow's entrance, Brown froze. He sniffed the ground, beside a patch of crushed grass. Tair smelled leather, horse sweat, and lamp oil. A boot print marked the dust. Beside it lay a short strip of blue cloth, caught on a thorn. Rag's sash had torn in dust well. Someone wearing that cloth had visited the hollow while they were gone. The tracks circled the shelter, followed their cart trail toward the ravine, and then turned east. The exile had found water. Now, Dustwell knew. Tair had no proof that Rag himself had entered the hollow. The cloth could have been planted, stolen, or carried by one of Hardin's riders. What he did have was a fresh trail leading toward Dustwell, and the certainty that secrecy had ended. Boren advised him to think like a poor shepherd rather than an insulted hero. An insulted hero chased the rider. A poor shepherd counted food, checked walls, and prepared for the rider to return with friends. They moved their camp from the broken shelter to the spring ravine that same day. The narrow approach gave them natural walls on two sides. Tair stacked loose stone across the entrance, leaving a passage wide enough for the handcart. He planted thorn scrub between the rocks and laid strips of boar hide beneath the gate so Brown could smell anyone crossing after dark. The work was slow because they lacked tools. Their knife was bent. Their rope had been cut merely through during Squirrel's rescue. The largest stones required leverage, and every useful branch had to be dragged from the ridge. Tair's new endurance let him work from sunrise until evening. But endurance did not turn bare hands into a hammer. Boren made the labor efficient. He marked a straight wall by stretching the damaged rope between two stones. He showed Tair how to wedge smaller rocks beneath larger ones and how to slope the outer face so a charging animal climbed instead of striking flat. He selected thorn branches by touch, rejecting brittle wood before Tair wasted time hauling it. Ash proved useful in a quieter way. The old gray goat stayed near Boren and rang the small bell on her neck whenever he wandered too close to an edge. She never evolved, never glowed, and never displayed dramatic potential. She simply prevented a blind man from walking into a ditch 3 times in 1 week. Tair made sure she received the same clean water and careful hoof trimming as the others. Her trust rose steadily. Thorn was more complicated. The red-brown goat escaped every knot Tair tied. She climbed the unfinished wall, ate the fibers from a drying wolf hide, and once removed Boren's blue cord from Tair's hair while he slept. When he tried to force her into the pen, she planted all 4 hooves and turned into a piece of hostile furniture. Old Tair's memories expected a kick or a beating. Tair refused both. He built her a raised stone platform where she could see the ravine and left a lump of the rough spring salt on top. He made the entrance narrow enough that Brown could not steal it. Thorn inspected the platform, pretended indifference for an hour, then spent the entire afternoon standing on it like the owner of Dry Hollow. Her trust rose from 22 to 49. Squirrel's milk allowed Boren to recover, but feeding her became urgent. Tair searched the ridges each morning and found patches of blue stem grass and shaded gullies. He cut what he could with the bent knife and carried it back in bundles. Squirrel consumed most of it. Ash and Thorn browsed farther from camp under Brown's guard. The boar meat solved Brown's appetite for now. Tair smoked long strips over a low fire and stored them in a rock niche packed with the rough mineral salt. The hides had greater value than food, but only if he could trade them. On the 9th day, bells sounded on the eastern road. A small caravan entered the hollow with 4 wagons drawn by 8 mules, 8 guards, and 20 additional pack mules. Its leader was Kavos, a compact man with a red headscarf, 1 gold ring in his left ear, and a smile that changed depending on who might profit from it. He followed the eastern route every 9th day and had planned to avoid Dry Hollow until Brown appeared on the ridge. The steppe guardian looked like a wolf that had eaten another wolf and kept the useful parts. Half the guards raised spears. Brown sat down and scratched his neck. Kavos decided conversation might be safer than running. Tair offered water from the 9-day reserve at a fixed price. 1 copper bit for each animal and none for people. Travelers usually paid 3 times that at guarded wells. Kavos accepted quickly and paid 28 coppers for the wagon and pack animals. Only after the mules drank did he become interested in the smell of smoked boar and the clay jar cooling beside the spring. Tair had been experimenting with squirrel's milk. Fresh milk spoiled too quickly for trade, so he heated it, added a measured pinch of the bitter spring salt, and pressed it beneath flat stones. His first batch became a rubbery white brick Brown refused to eat. The second crumbled. The third produced a sharp, rich cheese that Boran claimed could wake a dead man from the next room. Kavos tasted a piece and stopped smiling for profit. He asked how much Tair possessed. Only 6 small rounds. The merchant offered 12 copper bits for all of them, claiming that unknown cheese from an outlawed shepherd carried risk. Tair remembered Dustwell's prices. 12 coppers bought roughly a week of coarse grain for one person, or one badly worn knife with enough defects to explain the price. The milk in those rounds had kept Borun alive. The offer was insulting. Tair asked Kavos to weigh the cheese properly. The merchant's assistant produced a brass balance. 6 rounds weighed just under 4 pounds, according to the marked stones. Kavos offered 15 coppers after an impressive show of reluctance. Thorn walked between them and headbutted the balance off its crate. The base struck a rock. A hidden panel opened, and 3 thin lead plates slid into the dust. His assistant stared at the sky. Thorn picked up 1 lead plate, tasted it, and spat it onto Kavos's sandal. Tair's enhanced senses caught the merchant's pulse speeding. Borun, sitting 10 paces away, heard it in the pause between breaths. He observed that honest scales usually did not shed metal when goats touched them. Kavos dismissed the assistant with language Borun later described as commercially creative. He then weighed the cheese with stones from Tair's own sling pile. The 6 rounds came to almost 7 pounds. The final price for the cheese was 42 copper bits. Together with the water payment, Tair had 70. He spent 58 before the caravan left. The tools were used rather than new, and the grain sacks were only half size. But he obtained an iron spearhead, a serviceable skinning knife, a small axe, 2 sacks of barley, clean coarse salt, lamp oil, a needle, and a bundle of hemp rope. The remaining 12 coppers went into a clay jar beneath Borun's sleeping mat. Kavos also traded a worn ashwood shaft for 1 wolf hide. The merchant claimed the hide had mange. Tair pointed out that dead wolves rarely cared. Kavos respected the answer enough to stop arguing. By sunset, Tair owned a proper spear. The weapon was taller than he was, with an iron head no longer than his hand. Borun tested the shaft, balanced it across 2 fingers, and found the center. He corrected Tair's grip and began training him the next morning. At first, Tair was terrible. His perception showed exactly where a target moved. His body did not know how to put the spear there. He overreached, crossed his feet, and let the shaft drift away from his center. Borun knocked his ankles with the staff whenever he heard a bad step. Thorn watched from her platform with visible satisfaction. Training revealed the system's limits. Tair's spear rating rose from 5 to 6, only after 3 days of repeated thrusts. No hidden knowledge entered his muscles. Brown's reaction gave him time to choose. Skill still determined whether the choice worked. He built swinging targets from wolf bones and rope. Brown pulled the line while Tair practiced striking moving objects. The first session ended when Brown pulled too hard and a bone hit Tair in the forehead. The second ended better. Within 2 weeks, the spring camp changed. A waist-high stone wall crossed the ravine. The entrance had a gate made from the old handcart bed. Tair roofed a sleeping alcove with reeds and boar hide, dug a drainage channel around the spring, and built a separate pen for the goats. Smoke from the meat rack became a thin daily signal above Dry Hollow. That signal brought Hardan. 6 riders entered the ravine near noon. Hardan wore his green caftan despite the heat. Rag rode beside him in a new blue sash, and the senior overseer, Varric, carried a short club across his saddle. Varric was a thick-necked man with a flattened left ear and forearms wider than Tair's calves. Hardan's confidence weakened when Brown stepped onto the wall. He recovered quickly. Rich men often did when surrounded by employees. Hardan announced that all animals taken from Dustwell remained his property. The old dog and sick goats had been loaned to Tair, not given, and any improvements therefore belonged to their rightful owner. He displayed a document stamped with the red seal of the Well Council. Tair knew the claim was false. Even old Tair's memories contained the words Hardan had used during exile. Take the useless beasts and let them die together. Half the square had heard him. Witnesses meant little when Hardin controlled the well and paid the council scribe. Tair's body reacted before his mind. His shoulders drew inward. His grip on the spear loosened. Varric dismounted and approached the gate, and Tair remembered being held face down in manure while the crowd laughed. Brown growled. Hardin's riders tightened their reins. Tair forced his shoulders back. He did not accuse Hardin of stealing sheep or threaten revenge. He stated the practical truth. The animals had been discarded publicly. They now belonged to his household. Hardin could purchase cheese and water like anyone else, but he would not take Brown or the goats. The words sounded calm. Tair's heart tried to escape through his throat. Hardin ordered Varric to collect the animals. The overseer opened the gate with one hand and struck Tair with the other. Tair smelled the sweat shift beneath Varric's arm before the blow moved. He turned enough to keep the fist from breaking his nose. It hit his cheek and spun him against the wall. Brown lunged. Tair stopped him with a sharp hand signal. The dog froze inches from Varric, lips peeled from teeth. Killing an overseer would give Hardin the excuse to bring every armed man in Dustwell. Tair needed to prove possession, not begin a blood feud with 6 riders at his spring. Varric mistook restraint for weakness. He struck again. Tair slipped the first punch, saw the second, and still failed to move his feet correctly. The club caught his ribs. Air left his lungs. He thrust the spear shaft toward Varric's chest, but the overseer trapped it beneath one arm and dragged Tair forward. Perception let Tair watch himself lose in excellent detail. Varric headbutted him. Tair fell to one knee. Hardon's men laughed, though less loudly than the crowd in Dustwell. Brown's growl vibrated through the stones. Squirrel backed toward Borun. Ash rang her bell in short, anxious bursts. Thorn climbed onto the gate. Rag dismounted and reached for her rope. He warned Tair that stubborn livestock responded well to hunger and a heavy stick. Then he kicked Thorn from the platform. The goat landed on her side. Tair's fear disappeared. Not courage, not confidence. Fear simply had no space left after anger entered. He rose and drove the butt of the spear into Varric's knee. The overseer grunted, seized Tair by the hair, and threw him against the gate. Tair hit hard enough to blur the ravine. Rag dragged Thorn by one horn. The goat twisted, bit his new blue sash, and tore off the lower half. Rag slapped her across the muzzle. Thorn stopped pulling against Rag's hand. When he raised it to strike her again, she twisted between him and Tair, drove her forehead into Rag's knee, and forced him to release the horn. She then planted herself beside Tair instead of escaping through the open gate. Her trust climbed from 73 to 100. The system revealed the completed condition. Receive freedom instead of force. Claim high ground by choice. Defend the master against a human who harms the herd. Stone-colored light moved through Thorn's legs. Her hooves widened and darkened like polished basalt. The thin horns thickened, sweeping back along her skull before curving forward in sharp black points. Muscle filled her shoulders. She remained smaller than Squirrel, but her stance changed the entire shape of her body. She looked less like livestock and more like a boulder that had developed opinions. Thorn evolved into a stone-horned guardian. Rag was still holding one horn. She lowered her head and launched him across the pen. He struck the wall rear first, lost his silver tooth cap, and slid into the water trough. Thorn climbed onto his chest and began chewing what remained of the blue sash. The bond reward hit Tair's legs. Strength flooded his thighs and calves. His sense of the ground sharpened. Every stone beneath his sandals became a stable point rather than an obstacle. When Varric swung the club again, Tair did not retreat. He shifted 1 foot half a pace. The club passed his shoulder. Tair rotated from the ground, exactly as Borun had taught him, and drove the spear shaft beneath Varric's ribs. Tair hooked the back of his ankle and swept him onto the stones. Varric rolled up quickly and charged with both arms wide, intending to crush him against the gate. Tair planted his rear foot. The impact traveled through his body. He slid 1 inch. Tair struck the club hand, thrust the blunt end into the throat, and kicked the inside of the overseer's knee. The new strength in his legs dropped a man twice his weight. Before Varric could rise, the iron spearhead rested against the hollow beneath his jaw. Nobody laughed. Tair could hear 6 horses shifting, Rag sputtering in the trough, and Hardin breathing through his nose. Thorn stood on Rag. Boran remained seated beside the spring with his staff across his knees, listening to every movement. Tair told Hardin to take his men and leave. Hardin raised the sealed document instead. He declared that the council's order gave him legal authority. Thorn looked up from the sash. Before anyone could stop her, she jumped from Rag's chest, snatched the document from Hardin's hand, and ate the lower half. The red wax seal stuck to her lips. She chewed slowly while staring at the rich man. Borun asked whether the important official had finished reading. Hardin went pale beneath his beard. Tair did not pretend the eaten document solved the dispute. Hardin could commission another. The moment mattered because the riders had watched Varric lose and Rag become furniture. Force no longer looked cheap. Hardin mounted without offering a final threat. He promised to return with the council, then led his men out of the ravine. Rag had to walk because Thorn had frightened his horse onto the ridge. After they disappeared, Tair lowered the spear. His hands began shaking so hard that the iron tip clicked against stone. He had not stopped being afraid of Hardin. He had acted while afraid, which felt less impressive and more exhausting. Borun found him by sound and pressed 2 fingers against the bruise on his cheek. He observed that Tair had finally learned the first rule of dealing with cruel men. A predator tested the place where resistance seemed cheapest. The answer was not to become crueler. The answer was to make cruelty expensive. Tair's system values appeared that evening. Strength, 13. Endurance, 20. Speed, 18. Perception, 24. Riding, 9. Spear, 12. Leadership, 7. The numbers had doubled in places. More important, Hardin had entered Dry Hollow expecting to collect property and left without it. Tair repaired the gate before dark. Thorn followed him with red wax, still staining her mouth like a government official caught at supper. For 3 days, life improved. Then Borun woke unable to stand. The old man's skin burned beneath the striped cloak. A red line spread from the calf wound, opened during the boar fight. It had merely closed, then split again when Borun struck it against the unfinished gate brace 2 days earlier. Dust and old grit had remained beneath the new skin despite Tair's cleaning. The swelling reached his knee by sunset. Squirrel's milk kept him conscious. It did not stop the infection. Kavos had mentioned a healer named Mara at Reed Cross, 2 full days east by cart. Tair owned no horse. Brown could not carry Borun over that distance, and the old man would not survive 4 days there and back. That night, Tair counted 12 copper bits, 1 spear, 2 sacks of grain, and every animal he had saved. None of them could outrun a fever. Borun recognized the infection by smell before Tair finished describing the red line. In his younger years, a shepherd had died from a thorn cut that turned hot and sweet beneath the bandage. The old man estimated 3 days before the fever damaged his mind. Perhaps 4, because Squirrel's milk kept his strength from collapsing. Reed Cross was nearly 80 miles east. A fit rider could reach it in 1 day. Tair could not run that distance, and the handcart would take 2. Returning with medicine would take 2 more. The arithmetic was simple and completely useless. Borun remembered wild horses grazing near the abandoned salt pans north of Dry Hollow. Most moved with the seasons, but mares sometimes remained near the wind-carved cliffs after foaling. Tair had no saddle, bridle, or experience catching wild horses. His riding value of 9 came from memories of the old body's work with slow herd ponies. It did not make him a horse thief. Still, a poor option was better than waiting beside a dying man. Tair prepared a poultice from crushed saltgrass, boiled the wound, and marked the edge of the swelling with charcoal. He left Brown to guard Borun, took the spear, rope, water, and 1 pouch of barley, then headed north before dawn. His new endurance carried him across 10 miles of rolling grassland by midday. Perception helped him read tracks, but the salt pans held hundreds. He found hoofprints around shallow mineral pools, droppings beneath windbreaks, and one old campsite littered with rope fibers. Near sunset, a sharp whinny echoed from a gully. Tair followed it between chalk-white banks and found a chestnut mare trapped by one hind leg. A loop of rawhide had tightened around her fetlock and drawn a bent sapling across the path. Each struggle twisted the line deeper. Blood darkened the copper hair above her hoof. She was beautiful, in the dangerous way storms were beautiful. Her coat burned red beneath the setting sun. Her mane carried one black streak from forehead to shoulder, and a small white mark shaped like a spark lay between her eyes. She watched Tair with amber eyes, almost the same shade as his own. The system named her Spark. Health, 59. Trust, -12. Strongest quality, speed. Possible evolution, wind-footed mare. Condition, receive freedom without restraint. Return by choice during danger. Accept the master as rider. Negative trust seemed fair. He heard the hoof cutting air and moved before it reached him, but the edge clipped his shoulder and knocked him into the bank. He stayed low. He did not grab her halter because she had none. He did not throw the rope over her neck. He spoke quietly while cutting the rawhide with his new knife, keeping one hand against the ground so she could feel where he was. Spark kicked twice more. The second kick stopped a finger's width from his cheek. The sapling snapped upright when the loop opened. Spark surged away, stumbled on the injured leg, recovered, and raced out of the gully. Tair watched her disappear. No trust reward appeared. No grateful horse returned with a saddle and a certificate of ownership. He had freed a wild mare because leaving her in a trap was wrong, and that was apparently the entire transaction. He found the trapper's tracks nearby. 3 men had placed loops along the gully and driven horses toward them. Horse thieves might return at dawn. Tair destroyed the remaining snares, cutting every loop into useless lengths. That choice cost him the only remaining daylight. He started back under the stars, walking until his legs shook. Spark's hoofprints crossed his path twice. The mare followed from the ridges, never approaching close enough to touch. Her trust climbed from -12 to 3, then to 7, when Tair left half his barley beside a stone and continued without watching. She did not eat until he was 100 paces away. Tair reached Dry Hollow near dawn. Borun's fever had risen, but the charcoal mark remained just beyond the swelling. Squirrel's milk had bought time. Tair had not found a horse he could ride. He had found one who no longer hated him quite as much. That was insufficient progress. The horse thieves arrived before noon. 5 men rode into the hollow carrying hooked poles and coils of rope. Their leader wore a fox fur cap despite the heat, and one of his men led 2 captured mares behind him. They had followed Tair's tracks from the ruined snares. The leader demanded payment for the traps. When Tair refused, he noticed Squirrel's silver horns and Brown standing above the wall. Greed changed the shape of his demand. He announced that the evolved animals would cover the debt. Tair stood inside the gate with his spear. Brown guarded the narrow passage. Thorn waited on her high platform. Borun lay behind the spring wall, too feverish to sit. The thieves did not rush. They were professionals in the ugliest sense. 2 spread out along the ridge, looking for a second entrance. Another dismounted with a weighted net. The leader kept talking, hoping Tair would watch him rather than the hooks moving toward Brown. Tair smelled the oiled rope before it flew. He warned Brown. The dog jumped back, but the net caught one shoulder and snagged on the wall. A rider drove forward to tighten it. Tair cut the line with his spearhead, then ducked a hooked pole aimed at his neck. His balance let him fight on loose stone without falling. His skill remained limited. The second hook caught the shaft and pulled it aside. The thief with the fox cap rode through the gate and struck Tair across the back with a club. Brown lunged at the horse. Tair stopped him again. A panicked mount could crush Borun or the goats inside the narrow camp. The leader recognized the restraint and pushed deeper. He ordered his men to seize the silver-horned goat first. Thorn charged the nearest horse. The animal reared, tossing its rider into the wall. Brown tore the net apart. Tair thrust at the leader's thigh, but the man twisted in the saddle and trapped the spear beneath his boot. Tair held on. The horse dragged him across the stones. A wild cry rang from the ridge. Spark appeared against the white sky. The chestnut mare came down the slope at full speed, black-streaked mane streaming behind her. She hit the camp entrance without slowing. The trapped mares screamed recognition. Spark struck the thief leader's mount with her shoulder, forcing it away from Tair, then turned sideways beside him. Her trust rose to 100. Tair understood the final condition before the system displayed it. Spark had received freedom. She had returned during danger. Now she had to accept him as rider. He had never mounted a bareback wild mare at a run. This seemed a poor moment to learn. Tair seized the mane, placed one foot against a gate brace, and jumped. Spark moved beneath him. He landed too far forward, nearly slid over her shoulder, and grabbed with both knees. She flattened her ears at the insult to horsemanship. The evolution began under him. Her stride lengthened. Muscle tightened along her back and hindquarters. The wounded fetlock healed beneath a swirl of pale air and copper light. Her black mane thickened, and each hoof struck sparks from stone despite having no shoes. Spark became a wind-footed mare. The bond reward expanded Tair's lungs. Air filled him, deeper than ever before. His legs adjusted to the mare's motion with instincts he had not earned, while his mind understood balance, pressure, and timing. The system gave him talent, not mastery. That difference became clear when Spark turned sharply and he almost fell into the spring. He recovered by hooking one leg across her back. The horse thieves had entered on ordinary mounts. Spark crossed the ravine before their animals completed a turn. Tair snatched his spear from the dust, rode between two men, and struck the first with the shaft. Spark kicked the second man's horse blanket loose, sending rider and saddle sliding together. The leader fled through the gate. Tair pursued across open ground. For the first time, distance changed around him. The steppe no longer crawled beneath exhausted feet. Wind pulled his copper hair from its blue cord. Each of Spark's strides swallowed 10 of his old ones. He saw the fox cap turning back, disbelief replacing confidence as the gap vanished. Tair did not stab him. He rode alongside and struck the hooked pole from his hand. Spark cut in front of the other horse, forcing it to slow, and Tair drove the spear butt into the man's chest. The thief fell into a patch of thorn scrub. The remaining men surrendered their ropes and mounts. Tair sent them east on foot, with one waterskin between them. He kept the captured mares, because returning stolen property to thieves seemed unnecessarily polite. Spark's evolution solved the travel problem. It also created a feeding problem, a fencing problem, and a social problem, since any rider with eyes would want her. Tair had no saddle. He folded a wolf hide across her back, secured it with rope, and left for Reed Cross within the hour. Brown remained with Borun. Thorn guarded the gate. Ash kept her bell beside the old man's bed. The ride began badly. Spark considered reins a personal insult. Tair's riding talent let him stay on, but not persuade her to take the eastern road. She chose the northern ridge, then a dry stream bed, then stopped to glare at a bush for reasons known only to horses. Tair learned quickly. Pressure from his knees worked better than pulling the rope. Shifting weight before a turn kept them balanced. Letting Spark choose firm ground made them faster than forcing a straight line. By afternoon, a wall of brown cloud rose from the south. The sandstorm reached them on open ground. Wind erased the road, drove grit through Tair's clothing, and reduced sight to the length of Spark's neck. He wrapped his oversized tunic across his mouth and trusted the mare's footing. The storm pushed them north, away from Reed Cross. Tair used Brown's sense of smell to find dry dung, old campfire ash, and the bitter scent of a caravan marker coated with tar. Borun had once explained that the east road markers were tarred on the sheltered side. Tair crawled down, felt the post, and corrected their direction. Spark leaned into the storm for 3 hours. The bond reward strengthened Tair's lungs but he still coughed mud. His thighs cramped from gripping without a proper saddle. Twice he considered stopping behind a ridge. Each time he pictured the charcoal line on Borun's leg. They reached Reed Cross after midnight. The settlement surrounded a deep stone well and a cluster of reed-roofed houses. Tair followed the smell of boiled herbs to Mara's clinic. The healer was a lean woman in her mid-30s with cropped black hair, blue glass earrings, and hands stained yellow from root paste. She opened the door with a knife already in one hand. Tair explained the wound, fever, red line, and time since infection. Mara asked precise questions about smell, swelling, consciousness, and urine. Satisfied that he had not invented a fever to steal medicine, she prepared a packet of bitter gray powder and 2 vials of distilled spirit. The price was 2 silver crescents. Tair possessed 12 coppers. 20 coppers made 1 silver. He offered the wolf hide saddle, his spare grain, and future labor. Mara refused the hide and had enough grain. Then she noticed the sealed clay bottle of squirrel's milk tied to his belt. She tested 1 drop on a fevered child in the next room, waited, and watched the child's breathing ease. She valued the sealed bottle at 28 coppers and accepted Tair's remaining 12 for the medicine. Together they made the required 40. The payment emptied him completely, but Borun could not spend money while dead. As Mara wrapped the packet, a young rider entered wearing embroidered boots and a white fur collar. He had seen Spark outside and assumed any mud-covered shepherd would sell. He offered 1 silver, then 2, speaking louder each time Tair refused. Spark stood calmly beside the trough, while the man praised his own seat, his breeding line, and the expensive saddle he planned to use. When he finally reached for her mane, she placed both hind hooves against his chest and sent him backward into the water. Mara did not look outside. She simply added a brew salve to Tair's packet and said the purchaser would likely need it more. Mara forced both rider and mare to rest for 2 hours. Spark drank deeply, ate soaked barley, and stood beneath wet cloths until her breathing settled. Tair left before dawn, only after the healer confirmed that another hard run would exhaust the mare, not kill her. Spark carried him west faster than the storm had driven them east. His riding skill rose with every hard mile. He learned to rest his weight instead of fighting the mare, to drink without slowing, and to use her ears as warnings. By midday, the system showed riding at 31. By sunset, it reached 47. They returned to Dry Hollow in less than a day. Smoke rose above the ravine. Tair smelled burned rope, blood, and unfamiliar horses before Spark reached the gate. The stone wall remained standing, but the handcart gate had been torn from one hinge. Brown lay across the entrance with a barbed net wrapped around his chest. 3 arrows had struck the ground beside him. 1 had cut his shoulder. Borun was alive behind the spring wall. Ash stood over him, bell trembling. Thorn paced the ridge with blood on one horn. Squirrel was gone. So were the other 2 captured mares, most of the smoked meat, both grain sacks, and every round of cheese. The attackers had set fire to the sleeping alcove. Brown had stayed beside Borun instead of chasing them, exactly as they expected. Tracks from at least 12 riders led southwest toward the canyon country. 1 sign had been carved into the broken gate, a hooked spear beneath a black circle. Borun recognized the mark when Tair described it. It belonged to Sarkhan, the bandit chief who controlled the western passes. Tair gave his grandfather the medicine. The fever began to break before midnight. Then he cut Brown free, tightened the blue cord around his copper hair, and studied the tracks beneath the moon. The bandits had taken his food, his goats, and the animal that kept his family alive. This time, Tair had a horse. Tair did not ride out immediately. That decision cost him more than any wound. Every instinct demanded speed, but Borun could not be left feverish behind a broken gate. Tair repaired the hinge, buried the burned food, and gave the old man the second dose of medicine. He sent Spark to graze, while Brown followed the bandit trail far enough to fix the scent. Near dawn, on the 9th day return Kavos had announced during his first visit, caravan bells sounded from the east. Kavos entered Dry Hollow with 2 wagons and 6 guards, expecting cheese. He found smoke, blood, and Tair sharpening his spear beside a torn net. The merchant's smile vanished. Tair offered him free water for a year, if 2 guards remained with Boran until he returned. Kavos studied Brown, the tracks, and the empty grain bins. He agreed without bargaining. He also loaned Tair a short recurved bow with 12 arrows, explaining that dead customers rarely honored long agreements. Boran's fever had dropped enough for him to sit. He made Tair repeat the medicine schedule to Kavos, twice. Then, he checked the spear shaft for cracks and reminded his grandson that courage without a route home was only an expensive form of stupidity. Tair promised to bring one. He left at sunrise, with Brown running beside Spark. The trail crossed open grass for 12 miles, then entered broken hills, where red stone rose from the earth like shattered walls. Sarkon's riders had made little effort to hide. They believed nobody from Dry Hollow could follow fast enough to matter. Brown separated their scents. 11 men had attacked the camp. 2 carried blood from Thorn's horns. 1 horse favored a front hoof. Squirrel's smell appeared on a blanket, draped across a pack animal. Tair could even distinguish the bitter oil used on the barbed net. His perception no longer felt like magic. It felt like a second landscape laid over the first. By midday, they found an abandoned fire. 1 bandit had dropped a strip of gray wool marked with Hardan's crescent brand. The original missing sheep carried that mark. Tair followed with greater care. The trail led into Split Jaw Canyon, a narrow cut through layered red cliffs. Brown stopped before the entrance. Horse scent thickened beyond it, mixed with smoke, dung, unwashed men, and something larger. A deep impact echoed from inside. Wood broke. Another impact followed, accompanied by the bellow of a bull. Tair climbed the southern wall, while Spark and Brown hid among boulders. His strengthened legs and Thorn's balance carried him up ledges that would once have required rope. At the top, he crawled to the edge and looked down. Sarkon's camp occupied a bowl-shaped widening in the canyon. Rough palisades closed both ends. 27 armed men slept, gambled, repaired saddles, or watched prisoners. 3 elevated platforms held archers. A side pen contained more than 80 sheep and goats, including squirrel. Several bore Hardan's crescent brand, though someone had burned across it with a black hook. Those were the missing animals. Near the western gate, bandits had chained a massive black bull to a timber frame. He stood taller than any ordinary ox, with a scarred nose, broken horn tip, and shoulders covered in old whip marks. Iron bands circled his neck and front legs. Men used fire and hooks to drive him into a practice gate. Each charge split wood. Each hesitation earned another blow. The system identified him as Thunder. Health, 42. Trust, -86. Strongest quality, power. Possible evolution, Iron-Horned Bull. Condition, chains removed without command, freedom offered. Voluntarily protect the master from a human weapon. Thunder hated people so completely that the interface almost seemed impressed. Tair found Mirik among the prisoners. The gray-eyed youth carried stones between the inner wall and a repair pile. His yellow scarf was gone. One eye had swollen shut, and an iron collar linked him to 2 older shepherds. When a guard turned away, Mirik slipped a flat piece of leather beneath his shirt. Tair watched the camp for an hour. Sarkhan emerged from the largest tent near noon. The bandit chief had a shaved head marked by a black scorpion tattoo, a red vest made from overlapping leather scales, and a hooked spear longer than Tair's. He moved without wasted motion. Men stopped gambling when he passed. Sarkhan inspected Squirrel first. He had already learned that her milk aided healing. A wounded bandit drank from a cup and stood straighter minutes later. Sarkhan ordered the goat fed well. That meant she would remain alive. Then he visited Thunder. He struck the bull once behind the ear, not from anger, but to demonstrate control. Thunder surged against the chains. The timber frame groaned. Sarkhan smiled. Tair's initial plan formed around the camp's evening meal. Brown would create noise at the eastern gate. Tair would enter from the south wall, free Mirik and the other prisoners, open the animal pen, then escape west on Spark. The canyon's narrow shape would turn loose livestock into a moving barrier. It was a good plan against ordinary bandits. Sarkhan had not survived by being ordinary. At sunset, Brown appeared on the eastern ridge and barked once. The sound rolled through the canyon like thunder. Half the camp rushed to the palisade. Tair descended behind the storage tents, cut through the prisoner's rope line, and placed the borrowed knife in Mirek's hand. Mirek recognized him and went pale. He tried to explain in a whisper, but Tair stopped him. Explanations could happen after survival. He directed the prisoners toward the western pen and asked how to open it. Mirek showed him a key stolen from a guard. That was when horns sounded from both walls. Archers rose on the supposedly abandoned southern platform. Nets dropped across the path to the animal pen. Sarkhan stepped from the shadow of the grain tent with 10 armed men behind him. He had left the obvious weak side unwatched because he wanted an intruder to use it. The first arrow struck Tair's borrowed bow and tore it from his hand. The second hit the dirt beside Mirek. Brown's distraction had pulled only expendable guards. The main force had waited inside. Sarkhan congratulated the poor shepherd for arriving faster than expected. He had seen the steppe guardian at Dry Hollow and guessed that Tair would follow. He wanted to know how an old dog had changed. When Tair gave no answer, the chief shifted his attention to Spark, now visible above the southern wall. The interest in his eyes became hunger. Tair cut the nearest net before it settled. Mirek pulled one prisoner clear, but the second became tangled. Bandits closed from 3 sides. Tair's plan had relied on reaching the pen without a battle. That path no longer existed. He changed the objective. Instead of escaping with Squirrel first, he drove his spear through the rope holding the bull's timber frame. The frame tilted. Thunder bellowed and dragged 3 posts from the ground, but iron chains still bound his legs. Tair ran toward him. Every bandit nearby assumed the bull would kill him. Thunder probably agreed. The black head swung. One horn passed close enough to cut Tair's tunic. He ducked beneath the neck chain, found the locking peg, and struck it with the iron spearhead. The peg bent, but did not release. A guard attacked from behind. Tair smelled him, turned, and caught the blade on the spear shaft. He kicked the man's knee and used the butt to knock him away. Another guard threw a hook around Tair's waist. The rope tightened, dragging him backward before he could strike the lock again. Thunder charged the end of his chains. Tair went with the pull, let the hook carry him past the bull's shoulder, and cut the rope at his belt. He landed beside the post anchoring the leg irons. The post had been driven into cracked stone. He could not lift it. His strength remained 13, so he used the bull. Tair wrapped the loose rope around the post, looped it over Thunder's neck chain, and slapped the timber frame. The bull lunged at him. The rope snapped tight. Stones split around the anchor. Thunder tore the post free. One leg remained chained to another. Tair rolled beneath a horn, struck the second locking peg, and finally drove it out. The iron bands fell open. He did not grab the neck chain. He did not point toward Sarkhan. He backed away, dropped the spear, and left a clear path to the western gate. Thunder stared at him. The bull's trust rose from -86 to -40. Freedom offered did not mean trust earned. Thunder turned and charged the nearest human. The nearest human happened to be Tair. Tair jumped sideways. The horn caught his rope belt and threw him through the side of a feed shed. He struck the ground among barley sacks. Air left his lungs. The bull continued past, broke 2 support posts, and entered the animal pen in a storm of splinters. Sarkhan's men scattered. Tair's improvised solution had created chaos. It had not created an ally. A bandit rushed the loose bull with a burning hook, trying to drive him back into the chains. Tair crossed the pen despite the pain in his ribs and caught the hook on his forearm guard. The heated iron burned through leather. He cut the last neck chain instead of turning Thunder toward the bandits, then kicked the western gate latch open and left the path clear. Thunder's trust rose from -40 to 12. The chief adapted at once. He ordered archers to ignore the bull and shoot Spark. 4 men closed the western gate. Two others dragged burning straw toward the livestock pen, planning to force the animals away from the exit. Brown hit the eastern palisade from outside. A support beam cracked, but the gate held. Tair pulled himself from the feed shed. His left shoulder barely moved. Sarkhan approached with the hooked spear. The chief did not waste time explaining his superiority. He attacked the injured side. Tair caught the first thrust, but the hook wrapped his shaft and tore it free. Sarkhan struck with the butt, opened Tair's eyebrow scar, and swept his legs. Thorn's balance kept him upright, until the second sweep changed direction and caught his ankle. He fell. Sarkhan placed the hook against Tair's throat and demanded the secret behind the animals. Tair watched the chief's stance, the archers above, the fire spreading near Squirrel, and Merrick sawing at the remaining prisoners' collars. Explaining it would only encourage Sarkhan to torture animals until trust somehow appeared. Tair kicked dust into the chief's eyes. It was not elegant. It worked for one breath. He rolled away, grabbed a broken feedboard, and blocked the hook. Sarkhan recovered instantly and drove him toward the burning pen. The chief had greater reach, strength, and years of combat experience. Tair's perception revealed attacks he lacked the skill to answer. An arrow struck the ground beside Spark. The mare moved along the ridge, seeking a descent. Another arrow cut her flank. Tair's attention broke. Sarkhan's spearhead sliced across his chest. Mirek reached the pen gate and turned the stolen key. A bandit saw him. Mirek could have run. Instead, he threw the key through the bars toward one of the prisoners and tackled the guard before the alarm spread. The pen opened. Sheep poured into the camp. Squirrel remained trapped near the burning straw. Her tether had tangled around a post. Tair changed direction, accepted a shallow cut along his arm, and ran toward her. Sarkhan followed. Thunder animals, chain dragging between his front legs, fire reflected in his dark eyes. He had a clear path west. He could leave. Tair cut Squirrel's rope. The silver-horned goat pressed against his side. He pushed her toward the opening, then saw Sarkhan's hooked spear coming from behind. Thunder had already reached the open gate. He watched Tair turn back into the burning pen for a weaker animal, though nothing prevented the bull from leaving. His trust rose to 64. There was no time to turn. Thunder moved. The bull crossed the pen in 3 strides and placed his scarred body between Tair and the weapon. The spearhead cut across his shoulder and lodged beneath the old whip marks. Thunder looked back at Sarkhan. His trust reached 100. Dark light spread beneath his hide like iron heating in a forge. The bull's broken horn regrew, thickening into a black forward curve. Plates formed across his shoulders and forehead. Not metal, but hide dense enough to resemble it. His chest expanded. The loose chain snapped as he lifted one hoof. Thunder evolved into an iron-horned bull. The bond reward entered Tair with brutal force. His bones seemed to compress and strengthen. Muscle tightened across his back, arms, and legs. The oversized tunic pulled at the shoulders. His hand closed around the broken feedboard and crushed the edge. Strength rose to 58. Endurance reached 40. Speed reached 28. Perception remained 24. Riding remained 47. Spear remained 12. Leadership rose only to 9 after freeing the prisoners. Thunder had transformed Tair's body, not inserted months of weapon practice or command experience into his head. The physical change was not gradual. Thunder's power was not subtle. Sarkhan tried to pull his hooked spear free. Thunder turned. The chief released it and jumped aside as the bull drove through the pen wall. Timber exploded across the camp. 3 bandits behind Sarkhan raised shields. Thunder hit the first shield and folded it around its owner. The other 2 men left, before discovering whether their equipment had similar design flaws. Tair picked up his spear. It felt almost weightless. A bandit charged with a club. Tair caught the weapon in one hand, pulled the man forward, and lifted him by the front of his vest. For a moment, both stared at the distance between the bandit's boots and the ground. Then Tair threw him into 2 others. All 3 went through a stack of empty barrels. He did not have time to admire the contrast. Sarkhan rallied his archers and ordered them onto the inner platform. The chief understood that direct pressure on Tair had become useless, so he targeted Mirek and the escaping prisoners. Tair ran faster than the command. Spark descended the rubble slope at the same moment. Tair caught her mane, mounted without slowing, and crossed the camp before the archers completed their draw. He struck one bow aside, ducked the second arrow, and drove the spear butt through a platform support. The platform tilted. Archers slid into the sheep pen. Brown finally broke the eastern gate and entered with 6 camp dogs chasing behind him. He did not attack the smaller dogs. He shouldered them aside and went for the men holding barbed nets. Mirek released the last prisoner. Together, the shepherds opened the livestock lanes and drove the animals west. Tair rode Spark along the flank, using Brown's awareness to sense gaps. Thunder smashed the closed gate from inside. The first impact bent it. The second tore one hinge free. A tiny steppe mouse ran from the broken grain store and crossed in front of Thunder. The iron-hoard bull stopped so hard that his rear legs slid. He backed into a post, snorted in pure alarm, and moved sideways through half the gatehouse to avoid the animal. The escape route became twice as wide. Tair decided the result counted. Sarkhan retreated toward a narrow stair cut into the northern cliff. He carried a short sword now, his red scale vest dark with dust. Tair pursued on foot after Spark could go no farther. They met on a ledge above the camp. The bandit chief had lost control of the pen, but not his judgment. He kicked loose stones down the stair, forcing Tair to guard his footing, then attacked from above. The hooked spear was gone, yet his short sword moved fast. He cut Tair's forearm and used the cliff wall to hide his shoulder before each thrust. Tair's power could break a shield. It could not make steel harmless. He kept the spear between them and waited. Sarkhan expected him to force the advantage. Instead, Tair let the chief retreat 3 steps toward the cliff path. Brown barked from below. The sound gave Tair the position of Spark, Thunder, the prisoners, and the moving herd. Everyone was clear of the western gate. He no longer needed to stop Sarkhan here. Sarkhan did not know that. The chief feinted toward Tair's chest and cut at his lead hand. Tair released the spear with that hand, turned the shaft beneath the blade, and struck the rock beside Sarkhan's rear foot. Stone shattered under Thunder's strength. The ledge tilted. Sarkhan jumped backward onto the cliff path, avoiding the fall. Tair thrusted his weapon, knocked the sword into the canyon, and nearly caught him with the return stroke. Nearly was not enough. The chief disappeared through a narrow tunnel known only to the bandits. Tair followed 10 paces before the scent divided among 3 exits. Pursuing alone, underground, would abandon the herd and prisoners. He stopped. Sarkhan had escaped with perhaps 6 men. His camp, supplies, stolen animals, and reputation remained behind. Tair returned to the canyon floor. The prisoners had captured 11 bandits and tied them with their own nets. Squirrel found Tair first and pressed her silver horns against his chest. Brown inspected every wound. Thunder stood 20 paces away, watching with open suspicion. Tair did not approach him. He placed a bucket of water in the open, removed the last broken length of chain from the ground, and walked away. Thunder drank after everyone stopped looking. Mirek handed Tair the flat leather piece he had hidden. It was a sale tally bearing Rag's personal mark. 30 sheep from Hardin's northern flock had been exchanged to Sarkhan for gambling debt and a chest of imported wine. Mirek had found the tally in Rag's room after the exile. He had tried to bring it to Tair, but Sarkhan's scouts caught him on the western road and forced him to guide them through local ravines. The proof did not erase Mirek's lie. He knew it. He did not ask forgiveness. He only admitted that fear had made him help destroy the one friend who had trusted him, and that he would accept whatever Tair decided after his sister was safe. Tair looked at the bruises, the iron collar, and the gate Mirek had opened while escape remained possible. He told him to help drive the sheep home. That was not forgiveness either. It was the next necessary action. They left Split Jaw Canyon before dark with more than 80 animals, including the 2 mares stolen from Dry Hollow, 6 freed shepherds, and 3 usable wagons. They carried 2 sacks of weapons and enough grain to replace what Sarkhan had stolen. The captured bandits walked behind the wagons under guard. Thunder followed at a distance. When a second mouse crossed the road, the terrifying bull climbed halfway up a wagon wheel and broke the axle. Nobody mentioned it to him. Dry Hollow appeared at sunrise. Borin waited beside the repaired gate, striped cloak around his shoulders. Tair dismounted, placed the sail tally in his grandfather's hands, and guided his fingers over Rag's stamped mark. The old man listened as 80 recovered animals filled the ravine. Their family had left Dustwell with 3 sick goats and 1 dying dog. They had returned from the canyon with a herd large enough to feed several households. It was also large enough to attract every thief within 100 miles. Before anyone could celebrate, Brown turned toward the western ridge and growled. A strip of red leather had been tied to a thorn branch. Beneath it, Sarkhan's hooked circle mark had been cut into the bark. The bandit chief had reached Dry Hollow first. He had left a promise. Sarkhan's promise changed the question facing Tair. He no longer needed to defend 1 blind man, 3 goats, and a spring hidden in stone. 80 animals crowded the ravine. 6 freed shepherds had nowhere safe to return. Kavos's guards had seen the bandit mark, and the story would travel with the next caravan. A stronger gate would not be enough. Dry Hollow needed people, food stores, watch posts, and rules everyone understood before danger arrived. The first person to stay was Nessa, a broad-shouldered widow with a white head wrap, a burn scar along her left hand, and 2 sons who had survived Sarkhan's camp. Her husband had built stone wells before dying in a collapse. Nessa knew how to shape a retaining wall and could judge soil by rubbing it between her fingers. The second was Dagon, an older carpenter missing 2 fingers on his right hand. Bandits had taken his tools and burned his home. He spoke rarely, distrusted promises, and measured every beam twice because he could not afford to waste wood. The other freed shepherds remained after Tair divided the recovered animals by ownership marks. 31 belonged to distant families or caravan herders. Kavos agreed to locate them in exchange for 10% of any reward. 22 had no readable brands. Tair placed those in a common herd. The 30 crescent-marked sheep remained separate pending Hardin's response. Hardin sent no response. He sent 2 men to demand the sheep and the leather tally. Tair offered a clear exchange. Hardin could publicly erase the false debt, identify Rag as the seller, and compensate Borin for the seized hut. Then every surviving sheep would be returned. The messengers left with the offer. They came back carrying an accusation of theft. Tair kept the animals. Within 3 weeks, Dry Hollow stopped looking like an exile camp. Dagon built a proper gate from canyon timber. Nessa extended the stone wall around the spring and laid foundations for 2 long animal shelters. The freed shepherds cut grass in the northern gullies, while Kavos traded 6 unclaimed sheep for axes, nails, linen, and seed barley. During the same month, Kavos located the owners of 24 of the 31 branded animals. After taking the agreed 10%, he returned the rest of the rewards to Dry Hollow. The settlement used the money for roof beams, well rope, and winter seed. 7 animals remained in a marked trust pen until their owners could be found. Tair worked harder than anyone and made several mistakes because of it. He tried to oversee construction, train with Borin, manage the herd, make cheese, guard the ridge, and personally inspect every animal. By the 5th day, he had slept less than 10 hours total. His endurance kept his body moving, while his judgment became useless. He ordered a feed shed built too close to the drainage channel, then watched the first heavy rain wash half the floor into the spring. Nessa did not soften her criticism because he could lift the collapsed roof alone. She pointed out that leadership meant arranging work so the strongest person did not become the single point of failure. Borin agreed. He also told Tair that carrying every sack personally trained the shoulders while starving the brain. Tair began assigning responsibility. Dagon controlled timber and repairs. Nessa managed water construction. The freed shepherd Olek, a quiet man with a shaved chin and one clouded eye, took the northern herd. Merrick received the least desirable duty: night watch up the western wall and latrine digging during the day. He did not try to reclaim old friendship through apologies. He worked. When a common sheep went missing, he tracked it through rain until dawn. When 2 former prisoners blamed him for Sarkin's attack, he did not fight them. He showed them the barbed scars around his neck and returned to the wall. Tair watched without making trust cheap. The animals changed the settlement as much as the people did. Brown began training 6 ordinary camp dogs by taking them along the perimeter. The children named the largest 3 Fluff, Tiny, and Baby, which ruined every serious guard inspection. Squirrel's milk went first to Boren, the injured, and small children. Thorn patrolled the gate from high ground and attacked anyone carrying paper. Thunder stayed outside the main pen for 12 days. He accepted water and grain only after humans moved away. Tair never chained him. The bond with Tair remained at 100 because the bull had chosen him freely. But trust in one person did not become trust in everyone. A careless shepherd raised a stick near his flank, and Thunder drove him through a fence without touching him. The message was clear enough. Tair built the bull a heavy enclosure with low stone walls and 2 exits. He entered daily without a weapon, brushed the old whip scars, then left before Thunder became restless. By the end of the month, the bull allowed children to place handfuls of grass on the wall. He still feared mice. Spark refused every rider except Tair. Her appetite required good grain and open pasture, so Tair fenced a broad field along the northern ridge. He practiced riding at dawn, first around posts, then between moving sheep, then at full speed while striking hanging targets. His talent became skill through bruises. Borun trained his spear work from the ground. The old man could not see a target, but he heard the shaft cut air and knew when Tair's feet crossed. Dagon reforged one captured bandit blade into a longer leaf-shanked spearhead. Tair wrapped the grip in dark red leather cut from a spare scale vest found inside Sarkin's abandoned command tent, and kept the faded blue cord in his copper hair. His body no longer resembled the starving shepherd from Dustwell. Understrength broadened his shoulders and filled his arms. Squirrel's endurance restored weight to his face. The white scar through his right eyebrow remained, and his gold-brown eyes appeared brighter against skin darkened by the steppe sun. A month of daily riding, spear drills, construction work, and patrols finally moved the train numbers that Thunder's evolution had left untouched. Strength stood at 58, endurance at 62, speed at 55, and perception at 48. Riding reached 68, spear 55, and leadership 42. Every skill increase had a bruise, mistake, or completed decision behind it. Nessa made him a fitted sleeveless coat of ash-gray wool, leaving room to ride and work. He still owned the oversized tunic. Borun used it as a grain sack. People began arriving. A family driven from a northern pasture asked to camp near the spring. Then came 3 widows with 5 children, 2 elderly brothers who repaired harness, and a potter whose landlord had taken his kiln. Tair did not invite everyone from charity. Dry Hollow needed skills, labor, and defenders. He set 4 rules. Everyone worked according to ability. Children, the sick, and the elderly ate first during shortage. Stealing from the common herd meant exile. Beating an animal for amusement was forbidden. A 5th rule, developed after Thorn ate 2 rent agreements and a marriage certificate. Important documents were stored above goat height. By early summer, 53 people lived in Dry Hollow. The single spring could not support them. Nessa selected a low basin east of the ravine, where reeds had once grown. She believed an old underground channel crossed beneath it. Digging a second well required timber supports, iron tools, rope, and weeks of labor. Tair sold 8 sheep and 20 rounds of cheese to buy what they lacked. The price hurt. The well mattered more than watching animals multiply. They dug in shifts. Thunder hauled soil buckets through a wooden wheel. Spark carried messages and supplies. Brown guarded the workers. Tair descended each evening to inspect the stone. At 30 feet, they found damp clay. At 40, the air grew cold. At 47, rain stopped for the season. The steppe dried with frightening speed. Blue-stem grass turned yellow. Small pools vanished. Caravans arrived with empty barrels instead of goods. Dustwell rationed its well and doubled the price of water for families without livestock shares. Dry Hollow's first spring weakened to half its flow. Tair reduced rations. Squirrel produced less milk because good forage disappeared. The common herd grazed farther each day, guarded by riders. Every mouth mattered now. A man named Ulrich tested the third rule. He had joined with his wife and 2 children, claiming experience as a tanner. One night, Brown found him filling private jars from the children's water barrel. He had hidden 6 more beneath his bedding to sell to travelers. Ulrich argued that his labor entitled him to profit. Tair returned the stored water to the common supply and gave the man's family the choice to remain without him. His wife stayed. Ulrich left at sunrise with 1 full water skin and no share of the herd. Some residents called the decision harsh. Nobody stole water the next night. 3 days later, people appeared on the eastern ridge. Dustwell had come to Dry Hollow. The first group included children, fevered elders, and women carrying empty jars. Behind them waited able-bodied men, many of whom had watched Tair's exile without speaking. Myrek had left before dawn, after hearing that Dustwell's poor quarter was being emptied. Now he walked near the rear, with Lysa beside him. The girl's black braids were dusty, and she held their last household bundle against her chest. Hardon's guards had closed the main well to families unable to pay. Rag had taken horses and fled east after rumors about the sale tally spread. Hardon remained behind his walls with private cisterns. The people at Dry Hollow's gate asked for water. The common spring could support perhaps 70 more people for a short time. The unfinished well might find a stronger channel or might become a deep, expensive hole. Opening the gate to everyone could kill the residents who had built the settlement. Closing it would leave children outside, beneath the summer sun. Tair felt 53 people waiting behind him for a decision. Months earlier, he had struggled to tell 2 laborers not to take a pot. Now, silence spread across an entire ravine when he raised one hand. He admitted the children, the sick, and the elderly first. Each received measured water and shade. Able adults could enter by joining the well crews, herd patrols, or wall construction. Those who refused labor received 1 drink and directions to the next public well. Several men protested that they had once held higher standing in Dustwell. Nessa handed them shovels and explained that dirt respected all social ranks equally. Most took the tools. Mirek brought Lysa to Tair. He did not ask special treatment for himself. He asked only that his sister receive water, even if Tair sent him away. Tair gave Lysa a cup, then directed Mirek to the night shift at the unfinished well. Mirek nodded with visible relief. That evening, Boren sat beside the gate and listened to the newcomers. When a former Dustwell clerk claimed he had always doubted Hardon's accusation, the old man asked why the man's left foot kept stepping backward. The clerk stopped speaking. Boren had lost his sight, not his appetite for uncomfortable accuracy. The well reached 51 feet. Nessa heard scratching behind the southern wall. At first, the workers assumed settling clay. Then the timber brace moved against the grain. A claw larger than a hand punched through the wall and caught a digger across the chest. The shaft erupted. Men scrambled for the rope ladder. A pale, scaled head burst from the clay, followed by a body long enough to block the entire bottom. The creature resembled a steppe lizard enlarged beyond reason, with shovel-like foreclaws, armored plates along its back, and a mouth lined with backward teeth. It had been sleeping in the cool underground channel. The digging woke it. Tair descended before Nessa could stop him. His first plan was to keep the creature below while everyone escaped. He planted the spear against its open mouth and braced between the shaft walls. Thunder's strength held the jaws away for 1 breath. The lizard twisted, using the confined space better than he did, and slammed him into a support beam. The timber cracked. Clay poured from the ceiling. Tair released the spear before the collapse pinned his arms. The lizard surged upward, claws finding the wall. If it reached the surface, More than 100 exhausted people stood around the well mouth. Mirek remained on the ladder, below 2 injured workers. He could not climb past them. The lizard's tail swept the shaft and tore the lower rungs loose. The situation worsened in seconds. The initial plan had trapped Tair underground, damaged the supports, and left 3 men below the beast. He changed tactics. Instead of holding the lizard down, he drew it sideways into the narrow drainage cut Nessa had carved toward the old channel. The opening was too small for its plated shoulders. Tair struck its eye ridge with a loose stone, then retreated along a ledge no wider than his foot. Thorn's balance kept him upright as the creature snapped inches from his legs. It followed. The shoulders jammed in the cut. The lizard clawed forward, tearing chunks from the wall. Tair leaped onto its back, ran along the armor plates, and seized Mirek's collar with one hand. He lifted the young man and one injured digger together. Months earlier, a cooking pot had nearly folded him. Now he climbed a damaged ladder, carrying 2 adults, while the shaft shook beneath him. At the surface, Tair handed them off and ordered everyone away from the rim. Nessa reinforced the north brace. Dagon tied the main hauling rope around the new spear shaft. Thunder waited at the wheel above, uneasy from the creature's scent. The lizard tore free of the drainage cut and climbed. Tair descended once more. He knew the armored back would turn his spear. The mouth and underside were soft, but the creature kept both protected while climbing. He let it rise until the front claws reached the highest intact brace. Then he stepped onto the opposite wall and struck the spearhead into the joint beneath its foreleg. The blade entered deep. The lizard rolled, trapping the shaft against the clay. Tair wrapped both arms around it and held on while the creature thrashed. His strength stopped the spear from tearing free, but he could not drive it through alone. He shouted for Thunder to pull. The bull leaned into the hauling wheel. The rope tightened around the spear shaft. Wood groaned. The lizard twisted downward while the blade cut across its chest. Tair planted both feet on the wall, used Thorn's balance to keep his angle, and forced the spear toward the soft throat. The creature bit his shoulder. Its backward teeth caught the ash-gray coat and scraped bone. Tair could not retreat without losing the weapon. He drove forward. Thunder pulled again. The spearhead broke through beneath the jaw. The lizard convulsed, struck Tair against the shaft wall, and went limp. Its weight dragged the spear downward until the rope caught. For several breaths, nobody above made a sound. Then, Nessa ordered the hauling crow to move before the entire well collapsed. Her voice broke the shock more effectively than celebration. They recovered Tair, the spear, and the creature in that order. Squirrel's milk closed the worst damage in his shoulder over the next 2 days. The bite left 4 pale scars across his upper arm. Mirek worked beside his bed, repairing the torn coat without being asked. The lizard's tunnel revealed the underground channel. Clear water rose into the bottom of the well by morning. It did not gush freely. Nessa still had to line the shaft, rebuild supports, and install a bucket system. Yet, the flow was 6 times stronger than the fully cleared spring. Together, the 2 sources could raise more than 35 large buckets each hour. With covered storage, rationed animal troughs, and no waste, Dry Hollow could support its new people and deepen the reserve before the drought worsened. The settlement celebrated with roasted lizard tail, which tasted like tough fish and required heroic quantities of salt. Tair did not receive a new animal quality. He gained something harder to measure. The workers who had once argued at the gate now waited for his orders during danger. Mirek had stayed in the shaft when panic offered him another chance to run. Nessa trusted Tair to defend the plan she designed. Dagon began carving a proper meeting table for the settlement. Within 2 months, Dry Hollow held 180 people, 2 working wells, stone animal shelters, a market lane, and a wall high enough to slow riders. Hardan still controlled Dustwell's private cisterns. Sarkhan still lived. The drought forced both enemies to look toward Tair's water. One evening, a patrol returned from the western hills carrying strips of spotted hide. They had found dead livestock scattered across 6 miles. The bites were too wide for wolves. Tracks covered the dry earth in overlapping circles. Hundreds of them. Sarkhan was gathering raiders beyond Split Jaw Canyon. Ahead of them, he was driving a massive pack of hungry steppe hyenas directly toward Dry Hollow. The warning arrived while Tair was feeding a wounded steppe falcon behind the healer's room. He had found the bird 3 weeks earlier near a burned nest on the western ridge, one wing pierced by a short, black-fletched arrow. Oleg recognized it as the kind Sarkin's torch scouts used for hunting small game. The falcon had gray feathers, a black stripe over each eye, and the permanent expression of an official offended by everyone nearby. The system named him Gray and showed trust at 6. Tair cleaned the wound, splinted the wing, and offered meat without tying the bird's feet. Gray bit him often enough to establish a clear negotiating position. When the wing healed, Tair carried him outside and opened both hands. The falcon flew to the roof, stole a strip of sausage from Oleg, and refused to leave the settlement. His possible evolution remained sky-high, but its condition was incomplete. He had to return after being released, choose to scout danger for the herd, and accept Tair's direction without a tether. Gray's arrival also exposed a DIN system panel Tair had never seen. Herd leader remained locked. It required 6 evolved beasts to choose one purpose beyond their own survival, and only 5 currently qualified. The warning beneath it was less encouraging. Guiding too many animals across too much distance could cause loss of coordination, unconsciousness, or organ failure. For now, Gray occupied the highest watchtower and judged the preparations. The patrol estimated at least 200 hyenas. Dry Hollow had 4 days to prepare. Tair did not waste them trying to build an impossible wall. He studied the western approach with Brown, Spark, and 3 riders. The hyenas would follow the dry riverbed because steep ridges crowded both sides. The channel widened half a mile before the settlement, creating a killing ground where defenders could see each wave. Nessa ordered shallow pits cut across the channel and covered them with woven grass. Dagon built hinged barriers from scrap timber. Shepherds soaked thorn bundles in animal fat, not to burn the pack alive, but to create walls of smoke that could redirect movement. The remaining grain went into sealed stone rooms. Every child learned the path to the central shelter. Tair divided the defenders into whistle groups. 1 short blast meant close the lane. 2 meant pull back. A long rising note directed riders left, while a falling note directed them right. Brown trained the ordinary dogs to follow the same signals. By the 3rd day, Fluff, Tiny, and Baby moved more reliably than half the adults. The humor ended when scouts returned with arrows in their saddles. Sarkin's riders were driving the pack with fire, noise, and carcasses dragged behind horses. They did not need to control every hyena. Hunger and panic would do the work. Once the animals exhausted Dry Hollow's defenders, the bandits could take the wells. Kavos arrived on his scheduled route on the final afternoon with salt, bandages, and 1 small bottle from Mara. The healer had distilled a rare moonroot medicine using 2 weeks of squirrel's milk. It could guarantee recovery from a severe infection or pull one otherwise doomed wounded patient through the night. Dry Hollow could not make another until moonroot traders returned after the drought. Borun had developed a fever that morning. Dust had settled in his lungs, and the old calf wound had split 3 days earlier when Borin struck an unfinished stair. The healer had cleaned and drained it, but redness returned around the scar that morning. Squirrel's milk kept him steady. Mara's note explained that moonroot would guarantee recovery, while ordinary drainage, steam, and herbs offered a slower chance with real risk. Tair placed the bottle beside his bed and assigned Lysa to watch him. Borun disliked being watched by a child. Lysa informed him that blind old men with fevers ranked below stubborn goats in the settlement hierarchy. He accepted the arrangement after learning she carried a wet cloth and a wooden spoon. At sunset, Brown climbed the western wall. The steppe guardian's silver muzzle had whitened further over the summer. Evolution had rebuilt muscle and healed the leg, but it had not erased 14 years of life. After long patrols, he rose slowly. Tair sometimes caught him watching the younger dogs run with an expression that looked almost peaceful. Now the fur along his iron-dark spine lifted. A sound reached Tair seconds later, hundreds of paws striking dry earth. The first hyenas appeared beyond the river bend. They were larger than ordinary scavengers, with sloped backs, heavy jaws, and spotted coats stretched over hunger. Sarkon's riders moved on the distant ridges, throwing burning bundles behind them. The pack flowed away from the flames and toward Dry Hollow. Tair raised one hand. 87 adult defenders waited behind stone, wood, and sharpened stakes, supported by 23 trained dogs. The only movement came from children disappearing into the central shelter, and the dogs taking position beside Brown. Tair lowered his hand. The first barrier opened. A butchered sheep hung from a rope in the center of the dry channel. The leading hyenas rushed it. Their weight broke the grass covers over the pits. Animals tumbled into shallow trenches lined with thorn, not deep enough to kill, but enough to break the wave's momentum. Archers fired from the walls. Slingstones struck the animals climbing out. Tair and Spark rode along the inner lane, directing defenders toward gaps. The first plan worked. That was the problem. Sarkon watched it work and changed the pressure. His riders released a second group from the northern ridge instead of the riverbed. 60 hyenas descended a slope Tair had judged too steep. They slid, rolled, recovered, and reached the unfinished section of wall before the first wave withdrew. Tair sounded the long rising whistle. Riders moved left. Brown sent half the dogs north. Thunder planted himself behind the gate, while Nessa's crew swung a timber barrier into place. The hyenas hit before it locked. 3 squeezed through. The first went for a fallen worker. Thorn dropped from the wall and drove her stone horns into its ribs. The second met Tair's spear. He struck beneath the jaw, turned, and used the body to block the third. More claws appeared above the barrier. Thunder charged from inside. His armored forehead hit the timber, forcing it outward into the animals climbing over. The gate slammed shut, with 6 hyenas trapped on the wrong side. The defenders killed them in a tight, brutal fight. There was no room for clean spear forms. Tair used the shaft to keep jaws away from legs, kicked one animal into Thorn's path, and carried an injured woman behind Thunder's enclosure without lowering his weapon. Blood made the stones slippery. Thorn's balance kept him upright. The second wave retreated. A third came before the defenders reset. Sarkon had learned the whistle signals. His riders began sounding false calls from the ridge. One group at the southern lane opened too early, exposing the livestock pens. Hyenas poured toward Squirrel and the common herd. Tair abandoned whistles and used colored cloth from the watchtowers. Red meant hold. White meant move. Brown adapted faster than the people. He barked once for the dogs to stay and twice to advance, creating a second command system Sarkon could not copy. The attack continued after dark. Fire baskets lit the walls. Smoke flattened beneath the wind. Hyenas attacked in clusters, withdrew, then returned from new angles. They learned where spears reached and where tired defenders reacted slowly. One animal played dead beneath a pile of bodies, then seized a healer by the ankle when she passed. Tair killed it before it dragged her from the gate. His strength never ran out at once. It drained through hundreds of smaller costs. Each spear thrust tightened his injured shoulder. Each ride across the settlement exhausted Spark. Squirrel's milk could help only those who had time to drink it. Thunder's power defended one lane at a time. Near midnight, Sarkon's men set the western Thornfield on fire. Flames did not enter the settlement. They drove smoke into the central shelter. Children emerged coughing through the rear door. Lysa led them toward the second well, using Ash's bell to keep the group together in darkness. 12 hyenas had been waiting beyond the southern rubble, where a collapsed wall section looked too narrow for adults. They rushed the children. He cleared the wall in one leap and struck the lead animal hard enough to roll it twice. The younger dogs formed a half circle around the children. Fluff took a bite across the shoulder. Tiny held one hyena by the ear, while Baby barked with more courage than tactical value. Brown fought across the entire gap. He killed one, crippled another, and drove 3 away. The remaining pack did not retreat. They swarmed him attacking the old hind leg and belly. Brown could have broken through toward the open field. Instead, he backed against the narrow passage and made himself the wall. Tair sensed the change through their bond. Not words, direction, pain, and a fierce certainty that the children would not be touched. He rode across Dry Hollow with Spark at full speed. A false whistle sent defenders the wrong way. Tair ignored it, cut between two burning sheds, and jumped from the mare before she stopped. His spear killed the hyena on Brown's back. He seized another by the throat and threw it against the wall. Thorn arrived from the pen, followed by 4 shepherds. Together, they cleared the passage. Brown remained standing until Lysa led the last child away. Then his legs folded. 3 deep bites opened his belly. One hind leg had broken below the old scar. Blood spread beneath his iron-dark fur. The system showed health at 9 and falling. Tair lifted him. The dog weighed more than a grown man, but Thunder's strength made the burden possible. Tair carried Brown to the healer's room, while the battle continued beyond the wall. Squirrel's milk slowed the bleeding. It could not repair torn organs. Mara's moonroot bottle sat beside Borun's bed. The old man's fever had risen. His breathing rattled, and sweat soaked the striped cloak. The healer on duty said Brown would certainly die without moonroot. Borun might survive if they opened the infected scar again, kept his lungs clear with steam, and fed him measured doses of squirrel's milk. But nobody could promise it. Dividing the medicine would likely save neither. Tair stood between the bed and the floor where Brown lay. He had made decisions about water, exile, labor, and battle. This one stopped him completely. Brown had protected their family before Tair entered this world. Borun was the reason Tair had fought for a future at all. Choosing felt like cutting away half of the same home. Borun lifted one hand. He found Tair's sleeve, then followed it down to the bottle. The old man had heard Brown fall and understood before anyone explained. He ordered Tair to give the medicine to the dog. Tair refused once. Borun reminded him that Brown had saved their family on the first night, found the water trail, and guarded the spring. He had broken Sarkhan's gate, trained every dog in Dry Hollow, and now protected children who did not belong to him. A leader who gave everything for the herd had earned the herd's last medicine. Borun also observed that he was too stubborn to die from one fever merely because the convenient cure had been used elsewhere. His hand shook while saying it. Tair poured the moonroot between Brown's teeth. The healer immediately turned to Borun. Lysa heated water, while 2 adults held the old man still. The wound was opened, drained, and packed with bitter herb paste. Borun lost consciousness before the final bandage tightened. Choosing Brown had not cured the other half of Tair's family. It had left Borun alive, only on the weaker treatment and his own stubborn constitution. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then the dog's health stopped falling at 4. Outside, the younger dogs began howling. The sound spread from the southern lane to the western wall, then across the entire settlement. Brown's eyes opened. He heard the pack calling for him. The system appeared. Second evolution condition complete. Defend lives beyond the master's household. Train a pack that chooses to follow. Refuse escape while the herd remains in danger. The medicine had not purchased the evolution. It had only kept Brown alive and conscious long enough for the younger dog's choice, his completed acts, and his own attempt to rise to satisfy the condition. Brown tried to stand. Dark silver light gathered around the torn body. The fur along his neck hardened into a thick, metallic mane. His shoulders broadened again, though the change carried less raw growth and more density. The broken legs straightened. Wounds closed beneath new muscle. His eyes brightened from brown to deep amber, steady and aware. Brown evolved into an iron-maned leader. Tair's perception expanded through every dog bonded to the settlement. He felt where Fluff guarded the livestock lane, where Tiny limped near the second well, and where Baby had cornered something behind the pottery shed. The impressions were simple, built from danger, direction, and intent, but together they formed a living map. His reaction sharpened with it. Brown rose, shook blood from his coat, and walked to Borun. The old man touched the new mane and complained that his calf-sized puppy had grown armor without asking permission. Then, Tair and Brown returned to the wall. The final hyena wave had entered the dry riverbed. More than 70 animals advanced together, driven by burning pitch behind them. The defenders were too exhausted for another close fight. Tair felt the dogs across the settlement. He sent no whistle. Brown barked once. Every guard dog moved at the same time. Half rushed the northern wall, drawing the hyena's attention. The others opened a narrow lane between smoke barriers. Tair rode Spark into the riverbed, cut across the front of the pack, and led them toward the open eastern plain instead of the gate. The hyenas pursued the faster target. At the marked stone, Tair turned sharply. Nessa's crew released the final thorn barrier behind him. Brown and the dogs attacked the pack's flank, not to kill every animal, but to keep them moving through the open lane. The surviving hyenas broke east. Sarkin's riders tried to turn them back. Tair saw the movement through Brown's dogs before the men reached the channel. He sent Spark up the ridge, struck one rider from the saddle, and threw his spear through the torch bundle carried by another. Burning pitch spilled beneath their own horses. The bandits withdrew. Dawn found Dry Hollow standing. 31 defenders were wounded. 7 had died. More than 100 hyenas lay around the walls. The rest scattered across the eastern steppe. On the far ridge, beyond Sarkhan's retreating riders, a larger animal watched. It was a steppe lion, enormous even at that distance, with a mane so dark it looked black against the sunrise. Scars crossed one side of its muzzle. The hyenas gave it a wide path as they fled. The lion looked directly toward Tair and Brown. Then it turned south and vanished into smoke. Tair had no time to follow. Lights appeared behind the western hills. Not animal eyes, torches, hundreds of them. Sarkhan had never expected the hyenas to take Dry Hollow alone. They had been the hammer against the walls and the teeth against the defenders. Now his full bandit force was arriving with Hardin's armed men behind it. The attackers reached the western ridge before the defenders finished carrying their dead from the wall. Sarkin brought more than 100 raiders from the canyon settlements. Hardin added 60 armed herdsmen, 12 shield wagons, and every rider he still controlled in Dustwell. Rag rode beneath his father's green banner, a new silver cap on his tooth and another blue sash across his chest. They expected exhaustion to open the gates. Dry Hollow was exhausted. It was not divided. Sarkin stopped beyond bow range and sent a rider forward with terms. The settlement could keep its lives if it surrendered Tair, Borun, Brown, Spark, Thunder, Squirrel, and both wells. Everyone else would become tenants under Hardin's protection. The message described this as mercy. Nessa stood on the damaged wall, with blood dried across her white head wrap. Dagon held a carpenter's hammer, because every proper weapon was already in someone else's hands. Olek leaned on a spear beside the 3 dogs children had named, Fluff, Tiny, and Baby. Behind them waited widows, former prisoners, Dustwell families, caravan guards, and shepherds who had once lowered their eyes when Hardin passed. Nobody opened the gate. Hardin rode closer and demanded that his former workers remember who owned the land. A woman from Dustwell threw an empty water invoice over the wall. Others followed, with debt slips, grazing fines, and seizure orders. Paper fluttered around Hardin's horse. Thorn watched from her platform with intense professional interest. Tair sent the messenger back. He had perhaps 2 hours before the first assault. Gray waited on the highest tower during the hyena night. The falcon had flown above the smoke on his own, circling the ridges where Sarkhan's torch riders moved. He had returned at dawn, landed beside Tair without food being offered, and followed each pointing gesture toward the enemy lines. His trust reached 100 as the army formed. Gray launched into the brightening sky. The evolution happened in flight. His wings widened, gray feathers sharpening into dark silver along the edges. The black stripes above his eyes extended toward the back of his head, and his pupils narrowed until they reflected the entire western plain. Air seemed to fold beneath each wing beat. Gray became a sky eye. The bond reward changed Tair's vision. Distance pulled close. He saw knots in the leather of Sarkhan's shield wagons, individual arrowheads on the ridge, and the tiny movement of Rag's hand, signaling to someone near Dry Hollow's southern wall. When Gray banked above the army, Tair sensed points of attention below. Archers hiding beneath wagon covers became bright positions in his mind. Perception rose to 91. Spear accuracy rose with it. Tair did not gain the Falcon's view as a perfect picture. He received direction, distance, and target priority, sharpened by his own eyes. It was enough. Before the war council ended, Gray dropped from the rafters, stole a sausage from Olek's hand, and returned to the tower. Olek continued explaining the western lane, as though losing military provisions to a bird was expected. Tair's plan used every advantage Dry Hollow possessed. Nessa would hold the main wall and release stone piles onto the shield wagons. Dagon controlled the inner braces. Olek commanded the northern riders. Brown and the guard dogs waited behind the western livestock lane, hidden from cavalry. Thunder stood near the mill road, where the ground was firm enough for a charge. Spark remained with Tair as a mobile reserve. Mirek asked for the damaged gate. The position was the most likely to break and the least likely to survive. Tair considered giving it to someone without a history of betrayal. Then he considered the months of night watches, the canyon key, and the well shaft. He gave Mirek command of 20 defenders. The first arrows came at mid-morning. Sarkhan's archers fired from behind wagon shields. Tair saw each release at distance, called the direction, and the defenders raised cover before the volley fell. Most arrows struck wood. Gray marked 3 archers using heavier bows aimed at the well crews. Tair mounted Spark. They crossed the inner road at full speed. He carried 4 light throwing spears in addition to his main weapon. At the eastern angle, Spark climbed a rubble ramp, placed 2 hooves on the wall, and gave Tair 1 clear breath above the stones. He threw. The first spear crossed more than 100 yards and struck the heavy bow from an archer's hands. The second pinned a wagon cover to its frame, exposing the men beneath. Dry Hollow's archers answered. Sarkhan changed positions immediately. He sent shield wagons toward 3 gates at once, forcing Tair to divide attention. Hardin's herdsmen pushed from behind with long poles, while raiders carried ladders along the northern slope. The western wagon reached the broken wall first. Nessa released the stone pile. Hundreds of pounds of rock hammered the shield roof, crushed one wheel, and forced the men beneath to scatter. Thunder charged through the open inner lane and struck the wagon from the side. The frame turned over. Its heavy shield became a ramp, blocking the attackers behind it. The northern assault fared worse. Brown waited until half the ladders were set, then led the dogs through a hidden drainage exit. They attacked the horses pulling reserve wagons, not the men on the ladders. Panicked teams dragged equipment backward through their own infantry. For 1 hour, the defense held. Then, someone inside cut the gate lashings. Mirek heard the first fiber snap beneath the noise of battle. He turned and found Seelan, an older drover, admitted during the drought, sawing through the rear brace with a hidden blade. Seelan had worked 20 years for Hardin and believed the rich owner would restore his position after the settlement fell. Mirek raised the alarm. Seelan stabbed him beneath the ribs. Mirek caught the man's wrist instead of protecting the wound. They fell against the gate as the outer shield wagon struck. The last lashing broke. One brace slid free. Mirek jammed his own spear through the hinge ring and held it with both arms. The wagon hit again. The shaft bent across his chest. Blood ran down his coat. He could have stepped away before the third impact. Instead, he shouted for Dagon and remained beneath the brace until carpenters drove a new beam into place. Silen tried to crawl toward the opening. Lysa struck him across the fingers with Borun's staff. 2 defenders bound his wrists, carried him away from the gate, and locked him inside the stone salt store under guard. He would remain there until the settlement could judge sabotage and Mirek's stabbing. The gate held. Mirek collapsed only after Dagon secured it. Tair saw the crisis from across the settlement. He also saw Sarkhan, waiting for him to abandon the eastern lane. The bandit chief had placed his best riders behind the central ridge, ready to attack whichever gate Tair left. The initial defense depended too heavily on Tair moving to every problem. Sarkhan was creating more problems than one rider could reach. Tair changed the plan. He opened the eastern gate. Nessa thought he had lost his mind for approximately 1 second. Then, Brown barked from the west. Thunder left the mill road, and Oleg's riders formed 2 lines behind Spark. Tair was not abandoning the wall. He was taking the battle outside before the defenders ran out of wall. Spark launched through the gate. 30 riders followed. Hardin's herdsmen rushed to close around them, expecting exhausted villagers. Brown's dogs struck their horses from the flank. Thunder hit the nearest shield wagon and sent it rolling into the second. The open field gave Tair room to use speed. He rode along the enemy line, instead of through it, cutting spear shafts, striking hands, and forcing riders to turn. His perception showed each attack before it arrived. Spark's talent turned the gaps into paths. Thunder's strength made every shaft strike feel like a hammer. Sarkhan answered with disciplined cavalry. 20 raiders formed a wedge and aimed past Tair toward the open gate. Their purpose was not to defeat him. It was to force him between pursuit and defense. Tair signaled Oleg to continue outside. He turned Spark across the wedge's front and threw his main spear at Sarkhan. The bandit chief raised the hooked weapon to deflect. Tair's spear struck the hook, not the man. The impact tore Sarkhan's weapon sideways and pinned it through the leather shield of the rider beside him. The wedge lost its point. Brown hit the rear ranks. Oleg's riders struck the flank. The formation folded before reaching the gate. Hardin's men began to hesitate. They had expected villagers hiding behind stone. Instead, a copper-haired rider in an ash-gray coat moved across the field faster than their commands. An armored bull broke wagons, and dogs attacked every attempt to regroup. Gray circled above, exposing hidden archers before they fired. Hardin shouted promises of double pay. The promise worked until Thunder stepped on the pay chest. The wooden box flattened. Silver scattered beneath the bull's hooves. Several herdsmen dismounted to collect it. The rest stopped pretending they were an army. Rag disappeared during the confusion. Gray saw him enter the southern drainage cut with 4 men. Tair sensed the direction, but could not leave Sarkhan. He sent a warning through Brown's pack. Beatty, the smallest guard dog, ran toward the inner shelter, barking hard enough to compensate for size. Rad reached Borun before the warning. The old man lay propped beside the animal pens, wrapped in blankets after the healer reopened his wound. Ash's bell rested near one hand, but his staff was with Liza. Rag seized him by the striped cloak and pressed a knife beneath his jaw. He intended to use the blind grandfather as leverage after the gates fell. He failed to notice Thorn above the feed rack. The stone-horned guardian dropped onto one of his companions, bounced from the man's back, and struck Rag behind the knees. He lost the knife. Borun heard Rag's horse shift outside the pen and warned Lysa exactly when the man's weight moved. She stepped from behind the feed bin and swept Borun's staff across Rag's ankle. Thorn hit him again. Rag went over the low rail and landed in the manure pit beside the goat shelter. The same man who had smiled while Tair woke in filth now surfaced wearing half the settlement's winter fertilizer. Thorn stood on the rail and chewed his blue sash. The remaining infiltrators surrendered to Lysa, Baby, and 3 elderly women with kitchen knives. Outside, Sarkhan realized Hardin's force was breaking. He abandoned the gates and drove his remaining raiders directly at Tair. The 2 met near the overturned shield wagons. Sarkhan had recovered a long spear from one of his men. He fought from a dark horse trained not to fear dogs. His first thrust targeted Spark's wounded flank. Tair turned it aside, but the chief reversed quickly and cut his thigh. Sarkhan had studied him in Split Jaw Canyon. He knew Tair relied on perception and power, so he layered feints, hid attacks behind wagon frames, and used other riders to block Spark's escape routes. Tair's first attempt to end the duel failed. He caught Sarkhan's shaft, pulled with thunder strength, and expected the chief to lose his grip. Sarkhan released voluntarily, drew a curved sword, and slashed Spark across the shoulder, while Tair held the useless spear. Spark stumbled. Tair jumped down before she fell. He sent her away with one touch against the neck. Sarkhan dismounted as well, preferring to finish the fight before Brown arrived. They fought between broken wagons and scattered silver. Sarkhan used the narrow lanes to reduce Tair's reach. He cut at the hands, retreated behind shields, and kicked coins under Tair's feet. Thorn's balance prevented a fall, but the distraction allowed a blade to open Tair's side. Tair stopped chasing. Brown's pack showed the battle shifting away. Thunder had broken the final wagon line. Gray marked no hidden archer nearby. Spark waited, 20 paces behind Sarkhan, injured but standing. Tair let the chief advance. Sarkhan attacked with 3 fast cuts. Tair blocked the first on a broken shield, took the second across his ash-gray coat, and stepped inside the third. He caught Sarkhan's sword wrist with one hand. The chief headbutted him across the old eyebrow scar. Tair did not release. He turned from the legs, drove his shoulder beneath Sarkhan's chest, and threw the bandit chief onto the overturned wagon. The sword fell. Tair placed one knee on Sarkhan's arm and offered him the same practical choice he had given other defeated men. Surrender and face the families he had robbed, or continue and die. Sarkhan went still. Then he pulled a narrow knife from beneath his red scale vest and drove it toward Tair's kidney. Brown's reaction moved Tair before thought. He twisted aside and trapped the knife arm. Sarkhan used the motion to lunge upward, putting his entire weight behind the blade. The broken hook of his own spear protruded through the wagon shield behind him. Sarkhan's momentum carried him onto it. He stopped with surprise rather than fear. Then the knife dropped from his hand. The bandit chief died because he could not accept a battle had ended. His remaining raiders saw the body and lowered their weapons one group at a time. Hardin tried to flee. Dustwell riders surrounded him before he reached the ridge. They had seen the sale tally, the private water records, and rag crawling from the manure pit. No amount of double pay could restore the authority that had just collapsed. Tair did not hold a trial on the battlefield. Sarkhan's captured men were disarmed and put under guard. Hardon, Rag, and Silon were kept separately until witnesses and records could be heard in public. Mirek was carried to the healer with a stab beneath the ribs. Squirrel's milk slowed the blood loss, but he remained unconscious. Before the dead had been carried from the western lane, Gray screamed above the tower. A wall of smoke covered the southern horizon. The main front lay more than 40 miles away. Sarkhan's burning pitch had ignited scattered strips of grass during the battle, and the hard southern wind had joined them into one moving line. Old shepherds judged that the fastest frightened herds would reach Dustwell near dusk, and the fire itself after midnight, if the wind held. Boren lifted his face from the healer's cot and smelled damp stone behind the smoke. Rain might arrive before dawn. It would arrive too late to spare either settlement without preparation. The western gate lay broken. Half the defenders could barely stand. Dustwell sat directly in the fire's path. Nessa called an emergency gathering beside the second well. Dry Hollow's residents gave Tair authority over both defense and evacuation. The Dustwell riders who had arrested Hardin agreed to follow his orders until the danger passed. Tair accepted on one condition. His title would remain Shepherd. A throne still could not repair fences. The system showed what months of training, 2 battles, Brown's second evolution, and Gray's new sight had produced. Strength, 78. Endurance, 85. Speed, 76. Perception, 91. Riding, 94. Spear, 87. The trained skills had risen through use, rather than appearing with a single bond reward. The war for the wells had ended before noon. The entire steppe was coming toward them. The fire advanced faster than a loaded wagon, not faster than Spark at full speed. That difference gave them several working hours. Smoke still covered the sun and turned Afterian copper. Ahead of the flames, the steppe itself seemed to run. Tair climbed the western tower, with Gray circling above him. The first animals were already visible. Antelope crossed the southern flats in scattered groups. Wild horses followed, then deer, boars, cattle, wolves, and smaller creatures packed so tightly that dust rose beneath them like a second storm. Predators no longer hunted. Prey no longer scattered. Everything moved north because stopping meant burning. Dry Hollow stood across the natural route. The western wall would not withstand thousands of animals. The wells could be fouled or crushed. Homes near the southern lane would disappear beneath hooves. Dustwell lay 6 miles east, protected by weaker walls and a single gate that opened toward the fire. Killing the stampede was impossible. Diverting it completely would send the animals through Dustwell or into the cliffs, where the bodies would form a burning dam. Tair chose a third option. He would guide the migration through both settlements. The old, dry riverbed crossed south of Dustwell, curved between the 2 inhabited wells, and opened onto a broad northern plain with little grass. Most of the corridor already existed. The work required clearing carts and fences from it, breaking selected wall sections, and using short stone barriers and cloth screens to narrow the route. They were opening a path, not building one from bare ground. The plan required opening Dry Hollow to the same creatures everyone had built walls to keep out. Nessa examined the route once and began issuing orders. Dagan marked which gates to dismantle and which buildings to sacrifice. Olek organized riders between the settlements, while Mirek remained unconscious in the healer's wagon. Kavos loaded children and injured people into wagons bound for the Black Rock Ridge, where the fire had less fuel. Tair rode Spark to Dustwell. The settlement had already begun to panic. Hardin sat under guard in the council storehouse, while Rag remained bound in a separate grain room. Without Hardin's commands, the old Well Council argued over whether to close the gate or flee north. Half the working horses had been lost in the war. Tair did not ask permission. He ordered the southern gate torn down, livestock released into the planned corridor, and every water barrel moved behind the eastern stone line. Families carrying valuables blocked the lanes. Tair made the choice for them. Grain, tools, and medicine went first. Furniture, rugs, and Hardon's carved bed stayed behind. When one councilman protested the value of the bed, Thunder dragged it into the firebreak as a barricade. The discussion ended. Gray flew between the settlements. Tair's sight tracked the fastest animal groups through smoke. Brown and the guard dogs moved along the corridor, marking the safe route with scent and sound. Spark carried Tair from one weak point to another. Thunder tore down walls faster than 20 men with hammers. Squirrel's milk went to smoke-choked workers. Thorn and Ash led the common goats along the Black Rock path. Boren refused evacuation. He positioned himself on the stone platform between the 2 roads, with an old shepherd's bell hanging from a timber frame. 2 older children pulled the heavy rope, while Borun sat wrapped in blankets, listening to the echoes and calling the rhythm. The bell had once guided Dustwell's herds through fog. Its bronze mouth was cracked, but the sound carried farther than shouting. In smoke, sight would fail before hearing. Borun could work without sight. The system appeared while Tair watched his animals choose positions. The dim herd leader panel returned. Gray's evolution had supplied the 6th qualified beast, but the shared purpose condition was still incomplete. For a short period, Tair could sense the direction and movement of animals connected to his bonded beasts and guide them as one flowing group. The cost would rise with distance and numbers. Extended use would cause loss of coordination, unconsciousness, and possible organ failure. Brown took the western flank without being ordered. Squirrel remained at the healer station despite the approaching fire. Thorn climbed to the broken wall and began directing smaller goats with short headbutts. Spark stood beneath Tair instead of fleeing north. Thunder turned away from the open plain and returned to the southern barricade. Gray vanished into smoke to find the front of the stampede. Herd leader unlocked. Tair did not activate it yet. Using the skill before the largest wave arrived would leave him unconscious when he mattered most. The first animals reached Dustwell at dusk. 100 antelope entered the cleared riverbed. Dogs ran along the outer stones, discouraging sharp turns. Riders shook cloth screens near the houses, creating moving walls. The herd passed between the settlements and spilled onto the northern plain. Then came wild horses. Their panic made them harder to guide. A stallion struck a half-built barrier and broke through toward Dustwell's well yard. Spark intercepted him. She ran parallel, matched his speed, and gradually forced his head north. Other horses followed the stronger line of motion. Tair learned the scale of the problem quickly. One successful group did not mean the next would copy it. Smoke altered the route every minute. Falling embers started new fires behind the barricades. Animals slipped on churned ground and became obstacles for those behind. The first serious collapse occurred near the pottery lane. A frightened cow fell between two stone rows. The cattle behind climbed over her, widening the breach. Wild bulls turned toward the houses where injured defenders sheltered. Thunder entered the gap. The iron-horned bull planted himself sideways across the lane. The first wild bull struck him hard enough to drive all four hooves through the dirt. Thunder did not move beyond that. He lowered his armored forehead and pushed the animal back into the stream. A second bull hit, then a third. Tair and 10 workers pulled the fallen cow clear with ropes. Thunder held the line until the barrier closed behind him. Blood ran from one nostril. When a mouse fled the pottery shed across his path, he flinched so violently that the nearest worker grabbed the wall. He still did not abandon the gap. Night arrived with the main stampede. The ground trembled continuously. Sparks moved through the smoke like red insects. The corridor disappeared beneath thousands of bodies. Borin called each measured stroke from the central platform, while the children pulled the bell rope, giving workers a direction when they could not see the towers. Tair activated herd leader. The world opened through movement. Brown's dogs became points along the western edge. Spark connected him to the wild horses, matching her stride. Thunder gave him the pressure of cattle against the southern barrier. Squirrel connected to the common goats and every frightened animal crowding near them. Thorn felt the safe stone path beneath her hooves. Gray supplied direction from above. Beyond those bonds, Tair sensed thousands more as currents rather than individuals. He raised his spear and turned Spark north. The migration shifted, not like an army obeying a command. Animals did not become puppets. They noticed openings at the same moment, followed familiar movement, avoided pressure, and chose the path Tair made easiest. Dogs ran where the herd threatened to split. Goats climbed the safe ridges and drew smaller animals after them. Gray marked fire ahead, allowing Tair to bend the flow around it. The skill consumed him immediately. His heart raced beyond control. Each animal added noise, fear, and direction. He tasted blood at the back of his throat. Spark stumbled because Tair's left leg stopped responding for one stride. He released the skill. The connection vanished. The herd continued north for several minutes on momentum. Tair nearly fell from the saddle. Squirrel's milk restored enough strength for him to sit, but the system warned that a second use within the hour risked unconsciousness. The fire did not care. Wind shifted east. Flames crossed the old riverbed behind the migration and entered the abandoned southern pasture. Dustwell's outer sheds caught. Burning roofs collapsed into the corridor, forcing animals toward Dry Hollow's well yard. Dagon led workers to pull the debris away. A beam struck him across the leg. Olek dragged him clear while Nessa ordered the eastern reserve wall opened. They sacrificed 3 new houses to create another lane. People who had once fought over water now tore down their own homes, so strangers and wild animals could survive. A roar passed through the smoke. Every dog stopped for half a breath. The black-maned steppe lion entered the corridor. He was larger at close range than Tair had understood from the ridge. His shoulders rose nearly to Spark's neck. The mane was black from age and soot, marked by burning embers along one side. Old scars crossed the muzzle. A fresh wound opened his flank, probably from the fire or a wild bull. The lion was not fleeing blindly. He moved against the migration, using fallen animals as cover and hunting those trapped near the walls. Panic spread ahead of him. Horses broke from Spark's line. Brown's dogs refused to approach his front. Tair's initial plan was to draw the lion away from the corridor. He rode Spark across its site, cut the animal's shoulder with his spear, and turned toward the empty western field. Any ordinary predator would follow a wounded, isolated rider, rather than push into a dense herd. The lion watched him go. Then it attacked Brown. It understood which animal controlled the dogs. Brown avoided the first charge, but the lion's paw struck his iron mane and drove him into a broken wall. The guard dogs scattered. The migration began splitting toward the houses again. Tair turned Spark hard. His assumption had been wrong. The lion was not choosing easy prey. It was removing rivals that influenced the herd. Thunder charged from the side before Tair reached them. The bull's horns caught beneath the lion's ribs and lifted. The predator twisted in the air, landed across Thunder's shoulders, and tore through the armored hide with its rear claws. Thunder bellowed and crashed into the mill frame. The lion sprang free. One foreleg dragged slightly now, but blood covered Thunder's side. Tair attacked from horseback. He aimed for the wounded flank, used Gray's sight to judge distance, and drove the leaf-shaped spear deep beneath the black mane. The lion spun before he could withdraw it. One paw struck Spark across the chest. The mare fell. Tair flew from her back, lost the spear, and landed beside a burning fence. Heat rolled over him. His right shoulder stopped working. Spark tried to rise and collapsed. The lion placed one paw on the spear shaft and snapped it. The careful plan had failed. Brown was injured. Thunder bled near the mill. Spark could not carry him. The corridor behind the lion filled with panicked cattle, while fire closed from the south. Tair stood with half a spear. The lion rushed. Brown's hearing caught the first step through the roar of flames. Tair moved before he saw the body. He dropped beneath the paw, rolled across burning grass, and came up on the lion's wounded side. Thorn's balance kept his feet beneath him. He drove the broken shaft into the rib wound. The lion jerked away, and the wood tore from Tair's grip. A backhand strike caught his chest. His ash-gray coat split. He hit the ground and slid until one hand touched the millstone. His lungs wanted to stop. Squirrel's endurance forced them open again. The lion circled instead of charging. It had learned the reach of his weapon and the speed of his reaction. One eye remained fixed on Tair. The other tracked Brown, trying to rise near the wall. Tair looked for an advantage in the environment. The mill frame leaned over a drainage trench filled with shallow water. A burning roof beam had fallen across the upper supports. Ropes from Thunder's hauling wheels still ran through the structure. The lion stood between Tair and the only unburned path. Gray circled above the smoke and gave one clear direction: the damaged foreleg. Tair picked up Sarkhan's broken hooked spear from the battlefield debris carried into the lane. Only 3 feet of shaft remained, but the iron hook was intact. He advanced instead of waiting. The lion feinted left and struck from the right. Tair heard the shoulder shift, stepped inside the arc, and hooked the injured foreleg. He used Thunder's strength to pull. The lion did not fall. It dragged Tair across the dirt, then bit at his head. He released, ducked, and kicked the damaged joint with all the power in his legs. Bone cracked. The lion roared and lunged on 3 legs. Tair ran toward the mill. Spark's speed lived in his human body now. He crossed the drainage trench, planted 1 foot on the wet stone, and turned without slipping. The lion followed. Its injured paw entered the water and lost traction. Tair struck the hook into the hauling rope above. He pulled with both arms. The burning beam shifted but did not fall. The lion recovered and came again. Tair had misjudged the weight. Thunder could have moved it. Tair possessed only part of the bull's strongest quality, not the entire beast. He wrapped the rope around his forearm and braced both feet against the millstone. The lion's jaws opened. Brown hit it from behind. The iron-maned leader could not overpower the predator. He did not need to. His bite pulled the lion's head sideways for 1 second. Tair used everything in that second. He heard the beam crack through the flames. He saw the weakened support through smoke. He balanced on wet stone, filled his lungs, and pulled from the ground through his legs, exactly as Boren had taught him with the first wooden spear. The support broke. The burning beam fell across the lion's back and pinned its injured foreleg against the trench wall. Brown released and jumped clear. The lion thrashed, lifting one end of the beam. Tair seized the broken leaf-shaped spearhead from the dirt. He climbed onto the timber, while sparks burned his hands. The predator twisted its head, teeth closing on his left forearm. The bite stopped at the strengthened bone, but crushed muscle. Tair did not pull away. He used the trapped arm to hold the lion's head in position. Then he drove the spearhead through the soft hollow behind its jaw. The lion tore free of the beam, carried Tair 3 steps, and collapsed. Its weight pinned him beside the drainage trench. For several seconds, Tair heard only fire and his own heartbeat. Then, Brown's muzzle pushed beneath his shoulder. Thunder, limping heavily, lifted the lion enough for workers to pull Tair free. The strongest predator on the steppe lay dead between the 2 settlements. The migration was still coming. Tair could barely stand. His left arm hung useless. The system warned that herd leader would likely render him unconscious if activated again. He looked at the collapsing corridor, at Spark forcing herself upright, and at Brown gathering the dogs. Thunder was returning to the cattle lane despite the wounds, and Boren was still calling the cracked bell's rhythm through smoke while the children pulled. Tair activated the skill. Pain erased the edges of his sight. This time, he did not try to feel every animal. He chose one direction and trusted the bonds to carry it. Gray found the open northern plain. Spark took the central line. Brown spread dogs along the flank. Thorn led goats over the stone path. Squirrel moved with the children and injured. Thunder faced the wild cattle. The stampede bent north. Thousands of animals flowed between the broken walls. Hooves passed within yards of homes, wells, and exhausted workers. Predators remained in the current, but defenders struck only those turning toward people. Deer crossed first, then horses, cattle, boars, wolves, and endless smaller shapes. The fire followed behind, like a moving sunrise. Tair remained conscious until the last major herd cleared Dustwell. Then, the skill released him. He fell beside Spark. The mare lowered herself before he struck the ground. Tair woke to children screaming from the southern lane. A storehouse roof had collapsed after the migration. Fire surrounded the rear wall. 3 children were trapped beneath a crossbeam, including one of Nessa's sons. Adults tried to lift it, but the burning timber had pinned another support across the doorway. Tair's body refused to rise. He rose anyway. Brown supported him to the lane. Thunder was too injured to charge the ruins. Tair entered alone beneath falling sparks, wrapped his good arm around the crossbeam, and lifted. At the beginning of his second life, he had failed to raise one large stone while building a shelter. Now he raised a burning roof beam with one arm, while workers pulled 3 children beneath it. The last child cleared the doorway. Tair dropped the beam and stumbled into open air as the roof collapsed behind him. The rain Boron had smelled arrived before dawn. By then, the cleared riverbed, sacrificed buildings, and bare northern plain had already broken the main fire into smaller fronts. The rain did not rescue an untouched settlement. It flattened the remaining sparks, cleared smoke, and extinguished the last flames crawling along the Black Rock Ridge. Both settlements survived. Dustwell lost Barnes, its southern wall, and Hardin's carved house. Dry Hollow lost 32 homes, 2 towers, the market sheds, and half the winter hay. 20 people died between the war and the fire. Hundreds were injured. More than 1,000 domestic animals survived, and countless wild herds reached the northern plain. Victory did not resemble an untouched city beneath a clean sunrise. It looked like wet ash, bandages, broken walls, and people sharing the last warm milk beside 2 working wells. Tair spent 12 days unable to walk farther than the healer's room. Squirrel's milk accelerated recovery, but did not replace sleep, food, or time. His left forearm healed with deep tooth scars. Spark carried a white line across her chest. Thunder's armored hide regrew over 3 claw marks. Brown slept beside Boron for almost a week. On the 13th day, both settlements held a joint hearing in Dustwell's surviving well yard. The sale tally, private water ledgers, false debt order, and testimony from shepherds were read aloud. The council scribe admitted that Hardin had paid for the seal. 2 councilmen who approved the seizure lost their seats, while the remaining elders ratified restitution under Dustwell's existing debt law. Hardon's branded herds, private barrels, and bronze rings were assigned to named households he had cheated before any surplus entered the common store. Silon was convicted of sabotage and Mirak stabbing and sentenced to guarded labor rebuilding the gate. Sarkon's surviving raiders faced the families they had harmed, with restitution labor or exile decided case by case. Rag received the punishment he had once chosen for Tair. By joint vote, he was expelled from both settlements with the clothes on his body and 1 flask of water. Thorn ate the upper half of his final notice before he left. He was last seen taking the southern salt road and never returned to either well. Mirak survived the stab wound after 12 days between fever and sleep. When he woke, Lisa informed him that holding a gate with his own body was the stupidest useful thing he had ever done. Tair returned the yellow scarf recovered from Sarkon's camp and later placed him in charge of the Western Watch once he could walk the wall unaided. Trust had not returned through one apology. It had returned through months of choices. The hearing also ratified Tair's emergency authority as head of Dry Hollow. Dustwell kept its own reduced council, but both settlements signed public rules for shared wells, defense, and migration routes. Tair kept the title Shepherd. When Tair returned to the saddle, the system showed temporary penalties from the lion wounds and 2 uses of herd leader. It did not call anything final. His body had survived, but recovery and training still mattered. The numbers mattered less than the silence that spread when he raised one hand before the rebuilding crews. People from both settlements waited for his plan. He did not order Dustwell abandoned or demand payment for saving it. The 2 communities shared labor. Dustwell's surviving stone went to Dry Hollow's wall. Dry Hollow's water kept Dustwell's fields alive. Hardin seized herds, fed families from both sides. Kavos organized caravans through the new safe route, while Mara established a permanent healing house near the second well. Hardon remained alive to watch every bronze ring, private barrel, and branded animal become compensation for the people he had used. The former owner spent the rest of the dry season repairing the public well under guard. Nobody bowed when he passed. 2 years changed Dry Hollow more thoroughly than evolution changed any animal. Deep stone wells stood beneath covered towers. A broad wall protected both the market and the animal yards. The healing house smelled of boiled herbs and squirrel's milk. Children studied numbers in a school built where the old feed shed had burned. Caravan bells sounded daily along the northern road. Thousands of animals grazed on managed pastures beyond the settlement. Shepherds rotated the land instead of stripping one field. Water shares were measured publicly. A family could earn a home through labor rather than debt to a herd owner. Tair remained in the saddle. At 21, he stood broad-shouldered and steady, with long dark copper hair tied by the same faded blue cord. The pale ends still caught sunlight, and the white scar through his right eyebrow had not changed. His ash-gray coat had been repaired so many times that Nessa claimed the patches now owned the original cloth. The red-wrapped spear rested beside Spark whenever he rode the boundary. After 2 years of riding patrols, spear drills, construction, hunts, and command, the system finally showed the mature contrast. Strength, 90. Endurance, 95. Speed, 88. Perception, 98. Riding, 100. Spear, 96. Leadership, 95. The physical gifts came from the beasts. The mastered skills belonged to the work Tair had done with them. People called him the strongest rider of the steppe. He continued introducing himself as a shepherd. Boron remained blind. No milk, medicine, or system reward restored his eyes. He no longer needed sight to move through Dry Hollow. He knew each road by sound, each tower by wind, and nearly every animal by footsteps. His large house stood beside the market, though he spent most days on a shaded bench near the gate. Brown lay there with him, enormous as a young bull and armored around the neck. The iron-maned leader still tried to fit beneath Boron's old three-legged stool during storms. Dagon had rebuilt the stool 6 times. He now charged Brown directly for repairs. Thunder powered the grain mill. He refused to walk until children gathered beside the wheel and sang the same ridiculous song from the drought summer. The moment they stopped, he stopped. The arrangement had become an unofficial labor contract. Squirrel headed a line of healthy milk goats. Ash's bell hung beside Boren's bench whenever she grazed nearby. Thorn continued eating anything marked with a red seal, forcing the new council to store official records in locked cabinets above head height. Spark allowed no one except Tair onto her back. At the first market festival, traders presented him with an embroidered saddle decorated in silver thread. Spark smelled perfume from the craftsman's assistant and refused to let the gift within 10 feet of her stall. Gray nested on the western tower and stole food from every important meeting with perfect equality. The new market opened on the second anniversary of the day Tair and Borun entered Dry Hollow. Families from Dustwell entered through the eastern gate. Former bandit prisoners who had completed restitution sold leather beside people they once robbed. Mirek, now captain of the Western Watch, walked the wall with a yellow scarf around his repaired armor. Lysa managed the water ledgers and terrified dishonest merchants more effectively than armed guards. Tair stepped onto the speaking platform beside Boren. Thousands of residents, travelers, shepherds, and children filled the square. Behind them stood the strongest herd on the steppe. The crowd waited for a grand speech from the man who had led animals through fire and defeated the black-maned lion with a broken spear. Thorn reached over the rail and ate the corner of the festival banner. Tair stepped backward to save the remaining cloth. His boot landed in fresh goat manure. For one suspended moment, the square looked exactly like Dustwell on the day of his exile. Copper-haired Tair stood with one foot trapped in the same kind of disaster, while a goat chewed evidence beside him. Then, Boren began laughing. The sound spread through the square. Nessa covered her face. Mirek leaned against the wall. Children pointed without mercy. Even Tair laughed as he pulled his boot free. 2 years earlier, people had laughed because he was powerless and alone. Now the entire settlement laughed with him. The ground began to tremble. At first, everyone assumed thunder had left the mill. Then Gray dropped from the tower and circled the northern ridge. Spark lifted her head, amber eyes fixed beyond the wall. A line of wild horses appeared against the sky. Hundreds became thousands as they crossed the ridge, every color of the steppe moving in a single silent formation. At their front ran a white stallion with a black mane and lightning-shaped marks down both forelegs. He stopped beyond the northern gate and lowered his head towards Spark. The system opened before Tair. Spark. Second evolution path. Unlocked. Possible evolution. Stormrunner. Condition. Lead 1,000 wild horses through the lightning plane and return with every foal alive. No storm clouds covered the sky. Yet far beyond the horses, over the empty salt flats, a black line of lightning touched the horizon.